Hi, and welcome to Are We There Yet, the podcast show where we like to speak to real people, hear some real stories, real struggles, and true success. Today's guest is none other than Eddie Down. From the heartbeats of Manchester's nightlife to the passionate corridors of care, this is a man that has lived many lives in one. A DJ, a promoter, a businessman, a community pillar. With over 25 years of entrepreneurship, from Brownsuga UMS Events to the Off the Square and owning the Manchester Lounge. Also a man that also runs care companies as well. This is a man that shows that passion and also business can coexist together. This is more than a story about success. It's about reinvention and giving back. Welcome to the show, Eddie Down.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No problem. It's been a long time coming. Before we get into things, Eddie, how have you been? How's your week been? It's Thursday. How busy has it been Monday to Thursday so far? You're a man that seems to have your fingers and toes in many pies and biscuits.
Yeah, this week's been typical, dealing with two young kids. My two youngest kids, one's 10, one's 11. One's on half term, one's not. Typical. So that's the balance, balancing between that as well as business and working every day. Yeah, it's been, I'm not complaining. Just a normal week for me.
How does that work out? Yeah, two kids in two different schools.
Yeah, well, there must be loads of people up and down the country, but the balance things between one's at home and the other one. When they were a bit younger, that was more difficult. But now, Trey, he's at big school, so that's all right. So he's the one who's been off last week and this week, but the little one actually finished today, so that's good.
Ah, nice. Well, Eddie, before we jump into it, we're going to dive into your history, your past, your present, and the future.
I like that.
Wicked. We've got a lot to discuss today. So, why don't you start by taking us back to the beginning? What was it like growing up in Manchester, and what shapes the man that we see today? Now, I noticed a little bit of an accent on you. So you either travelled around or you basically wasn't born and bred in Manchester before you relocated there. So I'll let you tell us.
Yeah, I'm an old man now, but yeah, I was born in 75 in Blackburn.
Okay, Lancashire.
Yeah, Blackburn, Lancashire, hence the accent. You're right. So I always wind up my friends who still talk like that. But some people say, "Oh, Ed, where's that accent from?" Or "You've lost your accent," or "You sound like a Manc now." And anyone from Manchester will say, "You're not from Manchester. You're not one of us." But anyone from London will be like, "Yeah, you lot all sound alike." But us Northerners know the difference between Yorkshire people, Lancashire people, and Mancs.
Yeah.
And then you got the Scousers down the road. So we all don't sound alike. But yeah, I was born in Blackburn. There's 8 of us, got 4 brothers, 3 sisters.
Okay.
So Blackburn was a lot different than Manchester.
Busy house, 8 kids.
Yeah.
8 kids, a lot of fighting, a lot of arguing.
Yeah, true. But thankfully we actually all get on, which is, in this day and age, it's
a blessing.
That's a blessing.
It's a blessing. A lot of families seem to separate as they get older. It's a sad thing to see. But we try to do our best to hold them together. But before the clubs, before business, what was your first taste in music and entrepreneurship?
I'd say I was at Newcastle Uni. So I went to Newcastle back in 93. That's when I did my first degree. And back in 93, I can remember getting up there, and for what I was doing, agricultural business management was my first degree. And of all the places what did it in the country, there was a place called Aberystwyth in Wales. Then there's the Royal Agricultural College, and then Newcastle. Newcastle was the one which I thought, well, I like Barker Grove, and I've heard they got a good football team. They got a player called Andy Cole, so that might be all right. So I checked it out. I enjoyed the opening day. I applied, and I thought, right, I want to get in here. So I went to the open day, just worked it, and then thankfully I got what I needed to get in. And then I was there in 93. So that was different. You know, obviously Blackburn, back in those times, there was only a few families, my family, my cousin's family, and then maybe 2 other black families, maybe at the time, but there was 1 or 2 more like we're getting in, and by that time we were getting of an age where, you know, we wanted to be around more black people and the black culture and the scene. We'd often drive to Preston, sometimes we'd go to Liverpool, and every now and again when we were feeling a bit brave, we'd drive to Manchester and all the clubs, what was popping at that time, like
Feeling brave.
Lloyd's and places like that, you know, just getting our culture where we could. So yeah, that's where I was at.
You started Brownsuga and UMS Events back in the late 90s. What was the Manchester music scene like back then, and what drove you to create a space for that culture?
Well, going back to when you were saying what got me the bug. So, like I said, I was in Newcastle in 93, and it was worse than down here. You know, there was only one place down on the near the quayside called Julie's, and that was the only place that played R&B. You know, anybody in Newcastle, Durham or Sunderland just used to all descend there. So any black person who was in Sunderland University, Durham University, Newcastle University or Northumbria, that was the place, you know, so it was really nice. So I thought, okay, after a while, I can't just be having one night a week, you know, playing this sort of music. So I thought, I've got to learn to DJ. I've got to do something. You know, I've got to be putting on an event, learn to DJ, and then maybe put something on for like a few of my class friends. And I thought, that's what I'm going to do. So back in 95, Eddie Down was created. You know, obviously, that's not my real name, but
okay.
Eddie Down was created, and then I started learning to DJ, learning to mix, and then I said, right, I'm going to put on an event. So even now, to this day, getting that, I think we got around 90 people in, but it was a place where I think one of the oldest places was owned in Newcastle. Tommy, he was called. He used to own the Trent and the place called World Headquarters, mixed race guy. And he said, right, I'll let you guys have this place. I like you guys, I like what you're trying to do, you know.
Trying to be.
You know, because there was no scene back in those days, yeah. So there was only a few Asian kids, ourselves, and a few white people who were into the music as well. You know, there's, you know, R&B and the urban scene, you know, it's for everyone. So it was a case of, right, we'll put this on, we'll put this together. So we all chipped in, and we had grants back in the day, and, you know, people think, what's a grant? You know, so this is before the student loan. So we just all chipped in to that. Okay, the flyers and posters are going to cost around £60. You know, the venue is going to give it for like 150. But he said he'll give it us back if we get 100 people in. And then we'll all DJ ourselves. So there's no DJ cost. So we did all the costs. We did all the fitness. Nice. Like, right, guys, we need to get 60 people in here to break even. And anything more than that will be okay. So when we got 90 odd people in, even till this day, that was one of the happiest days, you know. My brothers at that time, my older brother Andy and my younger brother Pete, they were both studying now in Manchester. My mate Shardy, my mate Sam, and they're the ones who actually started Brownsuga. I'll come to that in a second. So it was a case of, guys, come up. He was like, oh, we got lessons the next morning. You know, I can't come all the way to Newcastle. You know, and it's cold. Yeah, but Manchester's cold. Blackburn's cold. Yeah. So I had to convince them. But they came, they represented for me. And then from then, I thought, right, let me finish, let me get out of here. But that's when I got the bug, you know, and people say, oh, why you call Eddie Down? I was like, oh, yeah, we were about to go to print with the flyer. And it was a case of, the name of the event was called Culture Vibe. And they were like, look, Eddie, we need to get this flyer done. You know, if we're going to get this printed, I said, look, just put Eddie Down. Like, what do you mean? He goes, yeah, leave it at that. Just put Eddie Down. And everyone just started laughing. So I said, yeah, all right, that'll do you then.
No way.
Eddie Down. So that was it.
And you've run with that for nearly 30 years now.
Yeah. So that's why Eddie Down was born. And it just stuck with me ever since.
Well, alias Eddie Down. Like, who is the real Eddie? That's the question. Even to this day, even on Google, you try and find anything on Eddie Down or bring up the DJ promoter, but it doesn't bring up anything about your success, which we'll get into today.
Yeah, compliments. I like that. I always like compliments.
I think you've answered my next question, but I'm going to ask it to you anyway. Do you remember the first time you felt like, I've made it? Or if you ever felt that way at all, but had that time ever come where you felt like, I've made it? Like, I've made it?
No, I don't think, people will say, yeah, you guys are doing well. You boys, you this, you that. And, okay, I look around and I look at people. I'm a bit more fortunate than others. I can't dispute that. But no, the podcast, are we there yet? I'm not there yet. I've not finished. I've not got to where I want to be. But, there have been successes. And to me, going back to what you were saying about Brownsuga, I was at the time back in 98 doing my masters at Reading by then. And the guy said, look, we're going to put on an event. We've managed to get a club. And the club was called Saturdays back in the day on Portland Street. Now, I think it's called Bar Rock now. Yeah, underneath the Britannia Hotel. But even when we used to drive over from Blackburn, it was a club where we'd drive there and it was like, right, you go first, then you two. And when you get there, you go, oh, guys, not tonight. He goes, all right. So we'll try again, go around the block, try to get somewhere else and come back. Goes, oh, no, you're wearing cords. Yeah, you got to wear pants. Well, okay, so we'll try another week. And he goes, oh, okay, yeah. Only shirts, your friend's got a t-shirt on. We go, okay, we'll try another time. So we knew what that was like, So to get into Saturdays, and when we were studying there, and my brothers phoned me and said, look, Ed, we've actually got a night. It's a Tuesday night, but we're doing Saturdays. I goes, are you sure? I think they're going to let us all in. He goes, look, we've had to do something to get in. We'll just call it a student night. And, the girl who sent in is on the team, she was white. And it was just the case of, well, okay, pay the deposit. Is everyone going to be NUS only? Because, yeah, it's going to be NUS only. They weren't expecting what came. So I drive up from Newcastle. My mate is studying, my mate from Newcastle at the time. He's doing his masters in Birmingham in care studies. So I goes, Ken, I'll pick you up from Reading and then we'll then drive to Manchester.
From Reading?
Yes, I drove from Reading, picked him up in Birmingham and then carried on to Manchester to get there. And the guys were like, Ed, you guys, you're on early. I was like, try me there for 10. And I was like trying my best. I had to feel, I had a class that day. So as soon as I finished, got back to my holes, jumped in the car, started heading off to Birmingham, hit traffic, get into Birmingham, hit traffic, then trying to get to Manchester. But anyway, so we pull up outside on Portland Street car park, coach after coach outside. And we had one of our friends from Blackburn who then, he was studying at Lancaster Uni. He brought a coach from Lancaster. Then we have friends who were at Liverpool Uni. There's coaches from Liverpool there. So I get there, I'm like, wow, guys, what's going on here? He goes, like, Ed, quick, you're set. You get in there. You're meant to be on now. And this was the time when we were all on records. So my mate Kenny carried one case. I had my other case and that, right, just set up in that room. So I was on at 10 o'clock, got there 10 minutes late, but I was on at 10 o'clock, did the first set and just looking at what the guys had achieved, and just looking at knowing that, less than 6 months ago or a year ago, this was a club where they weren't even letting us in. We weren't even allowed in that club at that time. So I went to see that, it was like 6-10% black, 30% Asian, and a few white people. Yeah. But to see what the boys have pulled off, it was amazing, and that was the first time Brownsuga came about. And there was like, well, Ed, you're an honorary member. You're here, you're our little brother. You're my big brother. And all our friends. So it was our friends from Blackburn and then one of our friends from Birmingham and 2 guys from London. And that's how it started.
Interesting. How did your early grind, the late nights, the flyers, the rejections that we've been speaking about, how did that shape your outlook today on the club scene? You're still involved in the club scene today. It's 2025. We're speaking about 1995. It's a long time.
Yeah. Some people just say I'm mad. I think I am a bit crazy. But yeah, the late nights, obviously, one of the things what was a problem back in the day, and one of the reasons why we just needed to have our own club, but we'll come to that, was many of these places, one, they wouldn't let you in as a customer anyway. Yeah.
Why?
Well, back in that time, like, we're not from Manchester, but we're adopted Manx now. Yeah. So my kids are Manx now. But back in those times, late 90s, there was lots of gun crime. There was lots of gangs.
Mm-hmm.
So they basically were thinking, if you were playing these sort of music, this is the sort of trouble what's going to come to their event. They're going to probably lose their license. And they didn't really want the headache. They didn't want to have, even though they play the odd commercial R&B soul tracks during the night, and they'll do some northern soul event, but they didn't really want nights where it's predominantly or a good percentage of black customers, whether it be students or older clientele. So that's what you were up against. That was the backdrop of what Manchester was at that time. So I'm not condoning or saying they were right or they were wrong, but it was difficult. It was difficult to operate in that climate. So as soon as we were able to get to a point where it was a case of, you know what, we've got a new manager, they don't really like these sort of events, they'd stop your night and put somebody else in there, they get a different type of DJ. So we're not going down this route no more. Or they'd have something which, as you can see now, goes to any place in the city or any place in the country now, the standard formula is urban music, but not necessarily urban people playing there or promoting them nights. But the ones what seem to last, or the ones what, the police and the councils are more happy to let roll, or the ones where it's not really run by black people or black promoters. So that's the backdrop of what we were up against.
Was there ever a point, or many points, where you almost gave up?
Yeah. Plenty of times. Plenty of times. There was a case of upscaling. So the good thing about having an older brother, Andy, who's, his degree, he's all about processes, systems, procedures. So that was what he was about. And it was a case of, all right, you might have done one event, which we did at Saturdays. It was a case, all right, let's all go out afterwards, or, or everyone pay back the grant and needs a bit of money, we were all good. Because, but what about the next one? Let's put some money aside for the next one. And obviously them like, no, let's just blow it. We've been a bit skint for a while. Blow all the money. Said, all right, okay, when we come back next year, we'll do it again, but we'll go for somewhere bigger. Let's get somewhere better. And that's what they did. And at that time, the number one place at in the city was a place called Discotheque Royales. Well, there you go.
I had some of my best times of my life in there. I'm telling you, Discotheque Royale changed its name a few times, but still carried on going.
Correct. And but that was the point. It was a case of, this is what we brought. The philosophy was, go for the biggest, go for the best. Don't take no for an answer. And they were saying, no, we don't want this. We don't need this. It was the hottest club in the city at that time. They were busy, guest list, queues around the corner. It was the spot.
It was.
So we were happy to get any night of the week they were going to give us. A Monday night, you want for a Monday night, give us a Monday night. Ridiculous. They did what they did on a Monday night, in September, what they did on New Year's Eve. That's how busy. When they said, look, we're coming to the Brownsuga promotions, Northern Explosion it was called, it was something different.
Missed those days, man.
So that is, things like that, those are the challenges. So in terms of why would you carry on, why would you stop? So at that time, I'm now in Manchester, I'm about to do a PhD, and my mum and my dad, Nigerian parents, like, what are you lot doing? Why are you messing around? That's a nice hobby. Okay, yeah, you make a few £100 here, make a bit of money there, but concentrate on your PhD, concentrate on your career. Okay, mum, okay, dad, you got to respect them.
Yeah.
They know, most of them know best. Yeah. So it's a case of, all right, we'll just do it for a little while. Yeah. So we did it for a little while, but it did come to a point where I was going to have to give it up because it was the case of, look, some of the nights, I'm digressing now, but some of the nights, even in my first year when I was doing my PhD, there was a club called Gatecrasher in Sheffield. Again, Manchester was bad, but Yorkshire, they were black people on the street, never mind in their club, you know. Judge Jules, Roger Sanchez, Pete Tong. This is what Gatecrasher is about, the Republic. We don't want this sort of thing in here. We said, no, we'll be all right. Can we put something on here? No, it's not going to work. So, okay, so we knocked us back for a while. And then eventually we got it. We said, right, guys, right, what we're going to put on in here? So, right, come on. By that time, we've started putting in events on with people like Trevor Nelson and names like that. So we said, right, Trevor, we do the, Sheffield, you know, I have to convince him. He didn't want to do Sheffield. He was like, it's not really sort of, you know, not convinced. I had to convince him. I had to pay him a good amount. But it paid off. And on that night, black, white, Asian, they all came from everywhere. But what it did tell me was we had to get a hotel that night, but I was in uni the next morning at 9 o'clock. And I was just like, oh my gosh. And anybody, I know just before we were talking about a certain road, a certain path, but, you know, snakes pass going there from Sheffield to Manchester. It's a dangerous road.
It's a dangerous
road. And it was raining that night. And I remember it well. And I was like, yeah, I'm glad we got a hotel. But in the morning, I had to get back, you know. So it was a case of, yeah, every now and again we could do these sort of things. But if we were going to take it serious and take it to the next level, we started to then get recognised by certain other promoters up and down the country. So, you guys, you Brown Sugar Boys, how about doing a collab in this town or in this city or X, Y, Z? So it came to a point where if I was going to do my PhD and pass, there was no point doing it because I was having to self-fund it myself, you know, and that was, you know, I know kids these days at uni and their fees are now something like £9,000 a year, something like
ridiculous, man.
And if you're foreign, it's even more than that. But to then, I think it was around £4,000 or £5,000.
$3,000 even like a year, like if I remember, yeah.
So I didn't have the money. So I was trying to use the money's what we're making from the events to pay for my fees. And then luckily the person who was my supervisor at the time, he said, well, when you start, there's a chance for you to be tutoring. So you can tutor economics in your first year. You can't do too many classes because we can't let first year students, PhD students, be working too long, too many hours, and it neglecting their studies. So I think the maximum I was allowed to teach in my first year was 6 hours a week. So given the 6 hours a week, so I was tutoring economics in the first year. I was DJing. I was promoting with my brothers. Yeah. And then I was also studying my PhD. So that was my life that first year. And, you know, to be honest, I hold my hand up. It was getting a bit, this is a bit.
I can imagine.
This is a bit on top. So, yeah, so that was one of the things what almost made it come to a head, you know, make a decision. And there were some other factors, I won't go into it now, but one of them was to do with Mugabe and Zimbabwe, because that was where I was meant to do my year out, my PhD, to do my research. So, and I'm just reading, sorry to digress, a book about African leaders, and it's called Dictatorland. But it just makes me laugh now that something like that really did have a bearing on my life, because at that time, the British government was saying no British residents, no British citizens were allowed to go to Zimbabwe for any reason. So, and I'd already done something with the University of Zimbabwe that I was going to have a year there researching what my thesis was going to be on. And this was on why sub-Saharan Africa struggles so much, and to do with certain corruptions and things like that. But at the time, they said you can't do it. So that kind of forced me on. So it was a case of, well, for this next year, rather than doing my year abroad, I'll concentrate on the events, Brown Sugar. And that's when UMS Events came about. So we started doing more events, started getting into more carnivals. We started going down to, got invited down to a place on Lincoln Square called Emporia back in the day, next to Sound. So one of our friends said, look, Laurie, for this year, come down. This was the year when that carnival was ridiculous. Destiny Child was there.
Man.
It was brilliant. That year, Nottingham Carnival had everything. So we were taking it more serious. You know, we were doing things at Morecambe. We had an event there. We were just taking on challenges, places and cities where people had never done before. Liberties in Birmingham. People like saying, well, you're going to have to speak with the Zulus. What are you on about, the Zulus? You need to speak with, you know, these people, and they'll let you know if you can do this event or not. And then they were like, well, I think it was, I don't know, Burger Boys.
Burger Bar.
Yeah. So
Burger Bar crew.
What is this then? Zulus and Burger Boys. I was like, yeah. You can't just come to Man City and just like put on an event. I was like, all right, so this is where my brother Andy is a negotiator. So when people speak about the brothers, you know, right, Ed, Eddie, he's the front, but the guys behind the scenes are Andy, he'll get the deals on. He's the one who would go down and speak to people. And then there's Pete, my younger brother, who's like, he gets them busy. He's the promoter. He's the one who puts the flyers up, posters up, you know. So it's a team. So I'm lucky we had that. But it was that year, it was a case of, come on then, let's do it properly. You know, the police don't want to do these sort of events. And they, as soon as they hear you from Manchester, they didn't want it even more. Never mind, they got their own problems. So we then started having best practice. So people are like, what do you mean best practice? Well, look, let's get hold of the police. Let's get hold of the council. Let's do it properly. If this is what you guys want to do. And like I said, by that time, Andy was working for a PLC by then. He was like, say, look, if you and Pete want to do this, you know, I'll work, you know, I'll get whatever monies I can make, and then I'll put it into the events so that you guys can do this properly. So Ed, if you're taking you out from your PhD, and Pete, you're about to finish your degree at Man Met, you know, I'll subsidise the events, and we'll go at it serious. But Ed, you got to be committed. So I said, right, you know what? Let's make a decision. I'm going to throw them out in the ring. I'm going to do this. So that is why, even now, I always laugh to the students when I'm teaching them. I'd say, yeah, I came to do a PhD in 99, and then I took a year out afterwards. I don't want to the DL about Zimbabwe, but I took a year out, but unfortunately things happened, and then I never did come back to finish a PhD. And that was a crossroads. So at that point, we said, right, come on, throw your hat in the ring, let's do it. So we went for it, and we're still here all these years later.
What did the city mean to you back then? Because it must have meant something for you to, you know, put this plan of action together and just stick out all these obstacles, and you still like, yeah.
Well, it's funny. Obviously, I'm from Blackburn. I support Liverpool, but Manchester is my city. You know, I rep Manchester to anybody when people say, oh, you Northerners or you Manx, this and that. Yeah, I'm proud of the city, and I'm proud to have, you know, done my little part of, you know, when people think back on places, you know, you always think with a smile, oh yeah. Oh, I smile back to when I was going about Piccadilly 21s or Royals or Saturdays, places where we couldn't get in, you know, but the places where you could get in were Lloyd's. You know, these are places where what held something to us, where it was like, right, let's get in the car. This week we're going Liverpool, right, the concert and then Kirkland's, you know, well, the other way around, the Kirkland's and then Concy's, yeah? And then we'll try to find the Blues somewhere, you know, you get there, you think, is that it? And then, right, let's try back to Blackburn, Manchester. Well, that was what we would do. Or when we were in Manchester, it was a case of, all right, Saturdays is finished now, or Royals are finished. Where's it to go? Right. And the irony is, where we are, there's a place called Benny's. Right, come on, let's go find Benny's. What do you mean? A place called Benny's? Yeah, it's near Radcliffe. All right. So we started driving over to Radcliffe. They're like, whoa, you're going the wrong way. You're like, what do you mean? It's like, we're almost going over a tram or a train track. Yeah, this is the way, but you carry on down that route. Yeah. I'm like, whoa, what's going on? No one's went down a river. It's like, yeah, it's the right way. So So it was a case of, that's the place. So we sought after that, and it was a case of, that was the vibe, you know. So to me, even now, 20, 30 odd years, there's sort of places where people remember. You know, I'll always remember Benny's, you know, because that was open till 5 in the morning. You soon it finished, you get a bit of breakfast and then make your way home. Yeah, that's what was, you know, a bit before your time, but that was the place. Anywhere in Manchester of an older age will remember Benny's, but that was in Radcliffe. Yeah, it was a spot. So, so what made me want to Manchester, like you're asking, is a case of putting on quality nights. You know, even now, I joke about my age, but even now, people will say to me, some of the best nights were at Tokyo Joe's in Preston.
I used to go there.
Some of the people will say, oh, the best night I had was at the Temple in Bolton.
I remember there as well.
The swimming pool and the cinema. Yeah, those were our nights. And then people say, oh yeah, sometimes we used to go Leeds. Oh, there was a place called Evolution. That was the maddest night ever. There was coaches from everywhere. That was our night.
Okay.
You know, and even now, so when our good friends, when we talk to people in Sheffield, like, before you guys didn't even let us go into the Republic, then after that was ever, they then started doing an R&B night on a Saturday night because their main room was getting quieter. Then they started trying to put some of the DJs what we would put on. But either way, the scene changed. But ultimately, to be part of something, you know, like I said, nobody was ever allowed to do an R&B in Royales before us. You know, then it became M2 and whatever. You know, that was because of us. You know what I mean? So when people are putting on events, and later on there was an Asian Thursday night, and then some others started doing events, some artists, you know, like Godfrey did some concerts there before it shut down. But nobody was doing them before we, you know, again at the Academy, until we brought DJ EZ there back in 99. They were like, oh, this won't work. They're like, what's this music? Garage? It's like, he was just EZ. Have you spelled his name right? Yeah, whatever. Look, that gig, even now, that gig, before these people do warehouse projects or this type of event, or, you know, putting on events, even before Sidewinder was coming to this city, you know, that was the first one. So when we did Promised Land, you know, Brownsuga and Garage Nation, that was the first big garage event in the city, you know. And you had I didn't know the politics. I was just chatting like naive, you know. You had the people like the Noonans on the door trying to say, look, if you want this night to run, this is how it's going to work, you know. Like, speaking of, I was like, who is this guy? It's like, don't say nothing, you know, they control the door, the night's going to happen, we've got to make sure the doormen are looked after, you know, and they'll keep out the gangs. You know, it's on the door of Moss Side, you know, even though it's a student event, people from Moss Side weren't allowing this gig to go on if they weren't coming in. It was the case that it's on their manor, you know, and some of them were a bit more clued up than some of the locals, you know, so you had a lot of London students who knew what garage was back in 99. Yeah, but the ones the locals, they were like, even if they didn't know what the music was, they were like, there's a massive queue of it, you know. My sisters, you know, or my brothers, they're talking about this event, you know what I mean, at the Academy. We need to be there. So it got a bit early that night. And this was the start of the scene. But what it did do was put us on the map, you know. So when Terry Turbo, and Jason Kay, rest his soul, they used to own Garage Nation before they sold it to whatever Garage Nation is these days. Yeah. So they were like, you guys did all right. Where else do you want to take it? So I was like, okay, well, we'll take it. Gatecrasher. All right. Sheffield, sold out there. All right, we'll take it. Leeds. All right. Evolution.
Sold out there.
Said, all right, okay, let's now find other places. And then we just started finding other places. Then people, Steve Gordon, Twice as Nice, started hearing about it. Remember, like, saying, do you guys, you know, how about taking our brand up there? Like, all right, let's go somewhere posh. Let's go Liberties in Birmingham. That's where we did there. Smash that. So, all right, let's think of other places. So that was where we're at. So we then started choosing different places, different brands, and that was where, you know, the Brownsuga and the Promised Land, those events, until we thought, let's do our own big brand. So that's when we started doing urban music showcases, you know, and that's where we would bring our own artists. That's when we started going to places like the Temple, you know, and other places. But yeah, that was how we managed to put Manchester on the map. And there was a night called Harmony and Ascension in Wolverhampton. They were based. Again, some students like ourselves, and they were doing a place called the Mezzanine in Wolverhampton. And then they started hooking up with somebody in Birmingham. They started doing a club called the Q Club in Birmingham, which was crazy. Birmingham's totally different.
You don't need to tell me that.
Birmingham people. But they said, right, let's hook up together. We've got Birmingham, and the Midlands. One of our guys will pull people from London. You guys have got the North, so let's put something on together. So that is part of when we go into where we're about today. That was where we got the idea. And again, Andy, my brother, and Peter, they're fundamental to the strategies and why we are what we do. It's all about, it's better to work together. Of course. Like-minded people who've got the same motivation. So rather than trying to think you can go to somebody else's city, and it happens all the time. I chat to promoters and other friends who are like, oh, how are they putting on that event at that warehouse or that place near wherever, near the Trafford. We all know where I'm talking about. They don't have no Manchester DJs on, no local acts on. That's the model, that's their strategy. For whatever reason they want to do that, but we would never disrespect. When we go to Preston, we used to call, who's the main guy there? Guy called Early B. Okay, who else? Rick Star. Who else? Compton. Right, get all of them. They need to be on this event. Right, guys, we're coming to your city. This is what we're doing. We really want you to be involved, part of this night. We're coming anyway. We're just showing you the respect. Yeah. But you guys are the main people in this city. We've got the artists, we've got the act, we've got the nightclub. Again, they couldn't get the club. Tokyo Joe's didn't want to give it out, but we were doing so well in other cities. They were trying to say, where else do you want? Yeah. We own Soul and Viva in Bury. So they gave us that on a boxing game. Man. Yeah, boxing day with Heartless Crew. They're like, there's no black events going on in Bury. They're like, it'll work, don't worry. The area manager was cool because he was like seeing how well we were doing at Discotheque Royale, which was that and the Dome 2 in Birmingham with their creme de la creme. Yeah. They were there. If you can smash it, and Majestics up in Leeds. Yeah. If you can kill these venues, you can kill anywhere. So when the time came for us to say, right, we're ready for the Majestics in Leeds, 4,000 people, the Dome, and did 112 there, killed it. But anyway, that's another story. Well, the model was find good people. Yeah. Find good people you can trust. Yeah. So when we were doing the bigger national events, we were repping for Manchester, but we were saying, look, who's our friends? Who are our colleagues? Who are our associates who are going to do it from Birmingham? Yeah. And that's why we work with the Harmony and Ascension guys. We went down to London. So one of the guys who helped out Brownsuga initially, he's now back down there in London that time. So he dealt with London, and we then started meeting up with, there's a place called Bagley's film studio. We did an event there. We started working with the guy, Trevor, from Sun City, so we started doing these type of events with the right type of people at the right times. So that is what is carried with us all the way till today. That doesn't matter, people say, oh, what do you know about tattoos? I don't know nothing about tattoos. Well, why do you own a tattoo studio? You own a tattoo studio? We'll get to that. So, but it's a case of, but the person who owns that, it's his baby. You will go into some of the things that we're associated with or we're part owners. It's not all about having the knowledge and everything. Yeah. But if somebody wants to work with you, and they're going to be genuine with you, and you feel that it's going to be something where it'll help them, that's the thing. I had no interest in ever owning a tattoo studio or piercing. It's not me. But it turns out it's going to be 3 years old. Next week. That is something where I'm happy and proud to put our names and our efforts to that because, my friend, call it what it is, my friend whose vision it was, he'd been in that game for like 10, 15 years. Okay. This was his baby. This is what he wanted to do. His passion. Working together. He was good at this. He said, but you guys are good at this. So working together, that is why we succeeded. We're still succeeding.
So, from studying your PhDs, taking a year out to, pursue your events become an entrepreneur, DJ, how did your family react? Because I know it wasn't pleasant.
No. Don't get me wrong. My dad was old school. He was like, well, it'd be better if you finish your PhD, I'm a mum. From a mum's point of view, back in the day, some of your parents, used to have these steel pots and cutlery, prestige pots, stainless steel pots. My mum, the factory was in Blackburn. My mum worked in the factory all her life when she came over the country in the late 60s. So all she wanted for her children was all of us to go to university, all of us to do better than what she did, and have more than what she ever had. So the sacrifices what she was making for us was the reason at the back of my head, I've got to go back and finish a PhD, or I've got to make sure I don't mess up my master's, got to make sure I get into uni and do my degree. So that was always there. And it was always the bit of, don't want to let your parents down. But ultimately, what they wanted us all to be was happy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So be happy and successful in whatever route you wanted to go down, So that was the thing what then made it less comfortable when I'm trying to say to them, yeah, I will go back next year, Mum. That's 5 years now. Yeah, I will go back next year, Dad. That's 6 years now. Got to the point after 7 years, I was like, I don't think I'm going to go back, but I'll still keep telling them I'll go back. I'll just like, yeah. Just like, we're now doing this concert with Missy Elliott, oh, Mum, yeah, we're now doing this, concert with Naz. Yeah, who's Naz? Yeah, don't worry, Mum. But either way, these are things which were distracting us and making us think, look, you know what? This is now going to be a career for us guys. Let's make it as a business as opposed to it now just being a hobby, And from there, it then became, well, all right, Andrew's now bought a house. What are you and Peter doing? It's still a bit of a hobby. All right, that's when I need to do something. So Mom's off our case. We've got to make it more of a business as opposed to a hobby. Let it start making sense. So then when the money started coming in, and then we were like, right, we've now bought this. We've now bought that. Then the thing came, oh yeah, okay, you guys are doing it serious now. All right, carry on. And that's why it's not as stressful as...
Now you're like, Mum, I'm not going back. I'm never going back.
I am going back next September, Mum.
Sorry. Right, Eddie, you went from promoting to actually running your own spaces. To my knowledge, you've had Lounge 31, Manchester Lounge, Off the Square, and any others I've missed?
Yeah, we used to have a few in Burnley.
Fill me in.
Yeah. On in Burnley. Hot Shots. We had a few hot shot bars. So we opened the first one at the Printworks next to Tiger. Then we said, all right, let's open another one. Yeah. So people, before they were going Birdcage, or before they went into Tiger, or before they went to Paparazzi, Entourage, or Lucid, or back in the day, they passed by, get the shots in, 10 shots for a tenner,
Holiday vibes.
Yeah, holiday vibes. So that's exactly it. Stags and hens. Saturday night, boom. Friday night, straight after work, get in there. So yeah, it was similar to like what Bar we're doing. They were on Deansgate lots. They were in Liverpool and a few other places.
Oh yeah, Bar.
Yeah, so we were kind of, we were following them. Sometimes you either come up with your own ideas or follow a successful idea. So we were trying to do something similar to Bar, but at the Printworks. When the Printworks was the hottest place in the city. So yeah, so we had a few hot shots. Then after them, we had a club there as well. And then we got in touch with somebody who had a place next to, remember Camelot in Chorley? The Charnock Richards?
You mean Camelot, the theme park?
The theme park, yeah. next to Camelot, there used to be a bar and restaurant there called Baku, yeah. We then took that. We had that, that was ours, yeah. And then from there, we thought, okay, let's make another brand. So then we opened a brand called Latch, which is in the Chorley City Centre. It's called Vestry now, anybody who's in Chorley. Then we thought, right, we'd open one in Preston. So we opened one in Preston.
Okay.
And then, so we were just, but the thing is as well, which was a telling lesson for now, we were growing. So at one point we had like nine venues.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was kind of difficult sometimes where on a night, even now sometimes I'll say, before I'm going out, all right, I'm going to do the rounds at the clubs that we all on bars, which 2 or 3, 4. But that was like 8. So I'd say, right, Pete, where are you doing tonight? Right, I'll do Darwin. Yeah, we had a place in Darwin as well. So I'll do Darwin. Then I'll go Burnley. And we had 3 places in Burnley at that time. Yeah. And then I'll do Bolton. All right, cool. Right, Ed, then you do the others. So I was like, okay. So then it was just kind of going round. And at that time, you know, we were starting to do less and less promotions, but then people will come into, like when we were doing places in Preston, there was a guy, he had a place called Anderson's. He said, oh, Ed, I just opened a place in Southport. I was like, Southport? And at that time, I can't remember you going out much in Southport. He goes, oh, I'm not too sure about Southport, sorry. But then people were saying like, there's this thing called Baseline and Niche. I was like, okay. So I was like, all right, Paul, is it all right to do a Baseline event there? He goes, okay. So I was like, so I put it on, so I meet my friend Nito, used to do a night called Pure Bass. So he said, right, we'll bring a brand, right, let's go to Southport. So there's a DJ called Jamie Duggan, Bunge, you know, Sean Banger Scott, and all these names I was just finding very funny. But at the time, it was like, right, but Bassline's going to be big. Wow. I know. It was all right. It was all right. So, yeah, so we started doing Bassline events, and then it was like, right, there's money in the packs, because we used to do the CD packs when we were doing Urban Music Showcase and Province Land, you know. So that was down to the guys in the Midlands, the Harmony guys and the Ascension guys, who said, look, yeah, your event's okay, but it's all about the branding. You know, you got to make sure you do your CDs and your tape packs. You tape packs them before everything.
Yeah, I remember.
It's like, you know, and then film it, so video it, so people can actually remember it. So it's a case of, all right. And you know what? Even the other one day, it was a long time ago when I was talking about the gig what we did in Bolton, watching people jumping in a pool. It's a nightclub in England.
Yeah, yeah.
This is 20 odd years ago, and people were like, there ain't no nightclub what's got a pool. And he goes, look, get to Bolton. What? It's got a cinema in there? Yeah. And it's got a Chinese restaurant on the side of it, part of it? Yeah. And I was watching the video the other time, people were like, wow. You know what I mean? So, yeah. That, you know, yeah, that's kind of where we're at.
What did it mean to you personally, owning your own venues?
Well, it was a thing out of a necessity. So at the time before the credit crunch and the financial crisis, you know, so we're going back to 2006, you know, people were still going out, you know, popping bottles, you know, that was the height of United. They were still successful at that time, you know, so it was that era. So, you know, you had places like Loaf on the Saturday night where the queue was down the road, you know, there are places where, you know, you go out on a Sunday night and it was like proper spot. Sugar Lounge was the, you know, you needed to be in there, you know, and it was a case of that was the vibe, yeah. And there was a place what had just opened maybe the year before called Circle.
Oh yeah, that was my spot.
So I was only ever able to get in once.
How, you know, but, in a Circle member, bro. You
know, but again, they were setting the standards.
Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously at the time we were heavily doing a place called The Old Monk.
I remember that.
The Old Monk. Yeah, that was us. Yeah, so we'd have The Old Monk on a Friday. Yeah. And then there used to be, again, my friend who will come back to in a little while, he had the Saturday night and a night called Emporia. So, you know, and all that clique, you know, all your Danny Patricks and all your Ultimas and all those sorts of ravers, you know what I mean? And Too Risky and Venus, all that, you know. But we were allowed to have the Friday night, you know, it was like less hassle, less risk. So it was a case of, all right, would it work? Would it not work? Again, some nights would do more on a Friday night than the Saturday night. You know, the Saturday night was still the main night, you know, like is in any venue. But you know, there were certain events what we put on there, what challenged them. So they were happy, they were good. And then they also owned a place, it's no longer there now, on the corner called Springbok. Yeah, on the corner. So that's on the corner where McDonald's is on one corner, KFC used to be on the other corner, Springbok on Portland Street.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's a
yeah.
It's a casino now there. kind of boots. Yeah. So, but what I'm getting at is the area managers whoever owned the Old Monk, there was a group of them, around the country. They had a different manager, they had a different direction where they wanted to go. So it was a case of, well, we're going to go down a different route now. See you later, or we'll kind of do it ourselves. So it was like, all right. So just around that time, there was a place, it used to be called Havana's back in the day. So there was a guy, he took it over, Dave Ellens. He then had it as pressure. He said, look, I don't want it to be like Havana's, whatever that was. I'd never stepped foot in it, but I knew what Havana's was.
I went there.
You look the sort. But no. But either way, it was what it was. So they were like trying to say, right, come down and have a look. So I come down and have a look the first time. And the turnstiles, I'm looking like, what's going on here? And there's a camera there linked to the police. I'm thinking, what is going on here?
Metal detectors.
Metal detectors and everything. So I'm like, is this really where I would play? Because the Old Monk, just off Dean's Gate, it was a bit plush, it was a bit nice, and the people who were coming in there, young soft students, people who just graduated, or people from out of town with a bit of money. It was like, are we really going to come down this place? Camera, ID, metal detectors, turnstiles. But it had a late license. He had a 6 o'clock license. So it was a case of the guy convinced us. I think it was, everything's all about timing. So at the time, it was a case of, like I said, the Old Monk would just coming to an end. These new owners had a different direction. So I said, we don't really want to be doing this, but we'll be in touch. And that was earning us a lot of money every Friday night. But then it was a case of, this place, right, I'm going to change. It's going to be called Pressure. Can you lot get involved and do a few nights? You guys take over and see what you can. I tell you, it was hard.
It was,
convincing. I didn't even want to go in that club at first. I was like, wow, why am I going to go into a place where there's a turnstile before you even get through the door? And then having a picture where it's connected to the police. But you know what? It took so long for that player to get going. Yeah, a few months. But when we got it going, we've never seen money like that until another venue. But ultimately, that was the spot, And the funny thing was, we were dealing with events where we were having to go to places where the security were like, oh yeah, we know what we're doing, because look, hey, can we have a meeting beforehand? Can we look at your procedures, your risk assessment? They're thinking with these kids talking to us, yeah, we run the, because look, you don't know what's coming.
Yeah.
You think Manchester's coming, but on this night, you're going to get the Scousers coming down. Yeah. And then you're going to get a few people from Brum coming down.
Yeah.
And then the worst ones out of all these are the HUD, man, because they don't know how to behave at that time. Yeah, sorry, Andy and Brynner. But those HUD guys were different. Huddersfield are just different. Yeah, Leeds people, so either way, all we were trying to say to these people sometimes, like, look, let's just see what your policies like, your procedures are. Yeah, what's going to happen? Are the police coming? Well, no, we don't do well. If we pay for it, is it okay to have a police van outside? Yeah, but no. That'll reassure some of the customers that everyone who's walked in has been searched, or don't bother coming, because that's the bottom line. If you guys, I know this person, as soon as you let that person in, they're inside, they're opening the fire exits, or they're at the bar, ordering that bottle of champagne and walking off. You ain't got the doorman to deal with it. So we'd have to bring in doormen sometime, or we'd have to sit down with them. It was the procedure. It wasn't always about the money. People that just hit and run. No, it's not about hit and run. It's about the customers coming, feeling safe, the DJs being able to turn up, play their set, and get out safe and get home. And the people, it's only a night out. It's like when people are going about football and these hooligans, it's only a game. Yeah. It's a game. I might support Liverpool, you might support Everton or United or whatever. It's a game. These people take it too far. Some of these people, it's a night out, and they don't do it properly, and then they don't end up coming home that night.
Yeah.
Then it was a case of, for what? What was it? Oh, yeah, because I have to pay. Because you have to pay. Or because somebody stood on your shoe.
Yeah.
Or whatever. It's nonsense. You understand? Or you didn't do your job right. That doorman's seriously injured now because you didn't listen. You didn't put on 4 at that time or 2 on that door or this. It's all about procedures.
Yeah.
That's what my brother was on from day one. Okay, you can get people to the door, but you don't get them in fast enough. Girls are complaining. They're young. Yeah? Then the guys at the back, they're rushing the door because they don't want to be at the back. Then the girls then go home. Then you just got a club full of guys. Doesn't work. Or they get in, they've not been searched. Next thing you know, something goes off. And it's a case of, well, what happened? Well, those are those 6 guys who rushed it earlier on. Well, at that point, just stop the music because it's no longer safe. We don't want to be a part of it. They might rob your bar, then you're moaning, you've not made your money. Why did we put on this event? Or the DJ, they go to him, tax his tunes or whatever, just because they want it, because they're idiots. These are things what would go on, but we didn't want that on our night. So it's always about procedures, pay that extra bit of money, get the right door team, pay extra, get police, get it so it's been risk assessed by the police, by the council, they say, right, that event can happen. It's not going to happen, no problem. So then you have to then start doing it as a business. Then we then start getting into insuring these events. Then if the event doesn't happen, it's insured. As long as it's not something where they've had intelligence that there's going to be some gun violence or some terrorist thing. That was the way to get around certain stuff. It's intelligence, X, Y, Z. But either way, you've got to treat it like a business. So that's why we treat it like a business. So you treat it like a business, you survive. If not, you're one of them venues, or you got locked off after an hour. Well, what happened? Well, it started getting busy then, boom. You know what I mean? So that's where we're at. So, So
that was
crazy back in the days. It was crazy.
Well, follow on to my next question. Every venue tells a story. Off the Square in Manchester, what story does that tell about Manchester right now?
Well, the guy, going back to what you were saying and then leading on to Off the Square, when we had them venues, again, something had happened with the owner, Dave, with the people. There was some landlords who owned a dentist above him.
Okay.
Yeah, they were trying to say, well, he wanted to sell the building. Then he was trying to up the rent on the on the owner. So he then said, well, I need to take the Saturday night now. You make an X amount on the door for me to be able to pay the landlord what he wants. I'm taking your Saturday night. Again. So they're saying, we're going to I'm shutting on Monday then. So he did, this was a bit underhand, even till this day, and there's a promoter. Anyway, I won't mention his name.
Yeah.
But then they then took over the Saturday night afterwards, a bit underhand, but he needed that extra door money. So he was making a few grand every week on the door, but he said the extra right in the rent, what they needed to pay, that's why he needed our Saturday night. So see you later, guys. So even though we built it up from nothing, even though we had proper people, coming to that venue, you never would have dreamed of walking through them metal detectors and going down there. You name the artist, we had them in there. Yeah. And they come in, and it was a safe night. Don't get me wrong. I soon began to love that place. When it was pressure, we were there for a few years. Brilliant. Lots of good memories. Made lots of good money. But that was a typical example. When people are done with you, they're done with you. So it was a case of, right, when it came about, we need our own place. So we opened up, it was called Lounge 31 then. It was at the Pinkworth, hottest part in town. And then, okay, where's the next hot place? Deansgate Locks was on its way down.
Yeah.
Northern Quarter. All right. So Northern Quarter, a place came about. That was the trend now. If you look now in town, so we're now talking 2019, just before lockdown. Lockdown's March
2020.
2020, so 2019. So a guy called Mark, it was his brainchild, and our good family friend Biggs. They was like, look, guys, there's a spot. Northern Quarter is going to be the place. Ankles, Northern Quarter, guys, let's jump on it now. All right, yeah. So they were right, 6 years in now. Obviously, lockdown came and affected, but live music, bands, clubs, that rawness, that open. I never ever went to the Hacienda. I was too young, but people like that industry look, yeah? But, the brickwork, the steel, aircon at the top, the exposed brick, that was it. We just want to dance. We don't want to rave, forget the booze, forget all that bougie stuff. We've got the lounge for that. We've got Circle for that. We've got Bijou for that. These are the places we were all firing at that time.
Yeah.
This is the place where we just want to come and dance.
There you
House music, dance music, you know, some R&B, but it's not about the R&B, it's about this, that, and the other. And that's why they're doing so successful.
I mean, running a night spot, it's not easy. It's no easy task. What would you say has been the biggest lesson that you've learned over the years of, you know, from one thing to another? What's the biggest lesson that you've learned?
Before, this would have been the key. Yeah, it's not as much now, but it's still important. Your security. Yeah? The wrong security, if it's a late night venue, because this is the difference now, the scene is changing and we're slow to that. Even though now, this weekend, you know, we've got an 18th party, but we're moving into the daytime raves and brunches. Yeah? But back in the day, it was security. Because if the customers weren't secure and the staff weren't secure, the police would do anything to get your place shut down.
Okay.
Yeah? So before, it was all about having a good door team, which is still relevant now, but they're mainly now talkers. You want somebody approaching your girlfriend, your wife, your sister, or whatever, your daughter. When they come there, you want them to be speaking to them with respect.
Yeah, of course.
You know, you don't want these gorillas who used to be there. They used to be bouncers. You call them what they were, bouncers. Yeah? But now you want security. Yeah? You want people, doormen, who are going to talk, or women, door persons, to speak with the people, right? You know, if you're a gangster, or if you're an idiot, or you're a lowlife, what you doing, mate? No, I don't want to. You don't want them in anywhere, but if just wait 1 minute, hey, we're just doing something like all that. Soon away, you know that person's going to be causing you trouble. So you want somebody who can talk to somebody. So having a right type of doorman doesn't need to be massive. But if that person, small, short, whatever, can't talk to that customer when they're walking to the door, and if he either feels intimidated or that person, that's when you might have somebody, an enforcer behind the door, who'll come out and say, look, this guy, don't like his vibe. But if not, treat everybody with respect. Yeah, nobody's rushing no doors these days. Nobody's like trying to get in there with weapons. Yeah, those people go somewhere. You know what I mean? That's not what it's about. So back in the day, it was the security. Yeah, but now I feel people after lockdown, it's not even about the scene. After lockdown, it all changed. Even now, it's not recovered. Yeah, people don't go out in the way they used to. Yeah, so I feel now people want more for the money.
Yeah.
So the same group of people who might come out back in the day like buy like 2 or 3 Magnums. Yeah. Now they're just buying the 70 CL. Before people might buy like 3 bottles of champagne just to show off. They might not even drink that. A couple of girls there. Yeah. Now they might buy one and like, I might have another one in a minute. Yeah. All right. Send that one back. You know, hey, can I get you know what I mean? Yeah. I understand that because the culture's changed. You know what I mean? Back in the day, we used to, every now and again, we'll sell it. You know, we weren't Circle, we weren't Bijou, but a 6 litre of vodka. You know, you sell them every now and again, or 3 litres, at least once a weekend, a couple of times in a month, easily. You know, a big 3 litre. Yeah. People are on that normal.
Yeah, no, at all. They can't afford it.
Can't afford it. And you know what I mean? In reality, it's like half the time they weren't even drinking it. You know what I mean? With that much, you know what I mean? There was one time, I remember now, like 4 years ago, some Asian kids came over. And it's New Year's Eve. 7 o'clock in the morning. Obviously, New Year's Eve run till 9. Yeah, 7 o'clock in the morning. So we sold them 6 litres of vodka, £700. These guys dropped it like that. They were like, are these guys on there like that? They were like, girls, get it over to them. Well, we took the money off them, of course. You know, I mean, 2 hours of raving. Yeah. These guys were gone by like 8 o'clock. Oh, anyway. And there's 3/4 back, so say £500 worth of this bottle still left. It is what it is. But still, man, those days, you know, don't get me wrong, people still buy big bottles of vodka. What I'm saying is it's not the norm now. It's not all the time. So, yeah, I think that knowing what people now want, you know, the older clientele want something different than what the younger clientele are wanting. So I'd say they want more entertainment. And it's not necessarily about the headliners. The headliners, few and far between. Okay.
So Eddie, you've worked in Manchester, Bolton, Darwin, Burnley, Preston, Sheffield. You've worked in a variety of different cities. What has, you know, working in all these different places taught you about people?
Well, what it has taught me is generally, especially most of them places, what you said, they're all up north. And kind of like friendly, you know. They really want you to succeed. I say that in the sense of, okay, you know, we have this north-south divide, you know, and I've got family in London, but, you know, people in London are a bit different, you know, a bit dodgy, but...
How are London people dodgy? Because it's not the first time I've heard this.
No, I even jokingly, you know, I've got family in London and they'll say they could be living next to somebody for how many years and they never even say hello to their neighbours. You know, it's just, everyone's busy in London. You know, people like say, oh, you guys, you know, you'll thrive in London, you'll love London. But London's too hectic, you know.
They're a bit more cold.
Yeah, you know, obviously you got programs like Corrie, you know, and EastEnders again. That. I don't want to go into soaps and stuff like that, but the kind of perception of people like in Corrie or Emmerdale or even things like Brookie, now that they're bringing it back, I think they're doing some crossover programs for its anniversary with Hollyoaks, something like that. Anyway, but I used to love Brookie. But yeah, it's that northern humour. You know, it's a case of, you know, the Southerners, yeah, it's all right, but they're just busy doing their own thing. But in terms of when we went to Sheffield, you know, I went to Leeds, you know, some of these places don't have as many, you know, as big a black population like Birmingham, Manchester, you know, London. But when we went to Sheffield, they loved what we would get, you know, them seeing that, you know, some young black, you know, kids are, you know, I might have been 18, 19, well, 21 by then, 22, you know, but young guys trying to do something, you know, they come out, they support you. When we went to Liverpool, again, they've got a bit of history in the culture, obviously, even from beyond, just out of Totsteth. But you know, they were welcoming, you know, young black kids. You know, we had some Asians in our team, you know, even till today, you know, and some white people. But predominantly, you know, the family and the you know, the main base of it, you know, was black organisation. And that's what we ended up being, a black organisation. But even back then, you know, we would go to a city, you know, and they would know, okay, all were welcome, but it was a black event. You know, everyone was, you know, multicultural events, you know, we didn't discriminate. And thankfully, you know, the customers didn't discriminate. They didn't, oh, no, it's going to be a black event. You know, it was the case of, at that time, before the mobiles, before these other things like MTV Lick, parties, you know, it was like trying to like, get onto that black culture, you know, that black vibe. Black was trendy then, you know.
Still trendy now.
Well, you know, it's now a brand, you know, like you got the people like the Kardashians trying to like make out that they're doing, you know, black culture, black influence. And, you know, so that was around that time, you know, the early noughties. So it was on trend, you know, at that time, people were trying to like get into the commercial R&B. Garage was blowing up. So, yeah, it was a case of people wanting it to work. Yeah, so as opposed to maybe a few years earlier, it was more difficult to, you know, put on a blatant black event. You know, we got to a point where we didn't need to water it down. You know, it was just a student night. All right, yeah, that was what we were at in 1998, where it was a case of certain venues didn't want us in there, but we just said, oh, yes, it's going to be a student night. But by the early noughties, it was a case of venues were trying to say, oh, do you mind putting on that event, what was successful, you know, in that city, or the area managers actually, can you come and have a word with us because we're struggling, you know, we're just playing Agadoo music and, you know, all this nonsense, you know, and the nights we're getting, you know, less and less. So they wanted to like cash in, you know, people like your Craig Davids, you know, your Soul Jamelia, you know, Mystique, these were like popular music, you know, and they wanted their angle of how to get in there. So, you know, it was welcoming. So when we were going to a town where there weren't predominantly lots of urban events, you know, it was fine. You know, like I said, it was good to have graduated from Newcastle when like I said, when I first went there in 93, there was like a handful of black people. Like I said before, you know, Andy Cole was still there. It was a buzz, myself and a few others, and that's why we created, you know, the events, what we did there. But to go back there around 4 years, so early 2000, and then putting on, bringing Trevor there for the first time.
Trevor Nelson.
Trevor Nelson. he was like, hey, don't you sure it'll work? I said, Trevor, it'll work, you know. Came there, did the business, you know, very successful. And we did at the student union, you know, back in the day when it was the student union at Newcastle University, didn't have any R&B. Yeah. So by the time I'd left, one of our brands, what we were doing, like culture vibe, Universal Voices, they were like, we've heard about this night. Would you mind, you know, if we have you for like your summer festival? The main room was like whatever dance and whatever house and stuff, but the little room, what else, something like 80 people, like, you know, like put you in there for the Black and Asians. And that was fine, you know. But then to come back a few years later and we were having the Saturday night in the main room and selling out 2,000 people, you know, that happened in the space of 4 years, you know, from a small room to be in the main room, you know. But yeah, so that, you know, ultimately, I love being up north, you know, and that's part of one of our, you know, fundamentals. Like the people are generally welcoming when we're putting on, or when we used to put on them type of events. So yeah, it was okay.
Sorry. So music connects people, but it can also isolate the person behind it. Are there times where maybe success has ever made you feel lonely?
One, you know, I know we're here today, but I don't know what you would class in as success, you know. Success, is it being that some of the events used to be sold out? Or you think success is the case of you putting on events in multiple cities? I'm not too sure by what you might, how, you know, term it as successful, but I'd like to see, yeah, that to a degree we have been successful in some of the events we tried to stage, but being lonely, not, I don't feel I ever felt being lonely. No.
You're lucky guy. You've been in a good headspace in that case. Then a lot of people go through, you know, ups and downs and times where they might feel isolated. But if you got a good team around you, then you know you're supposed to be doing something right. You've been in the game 30 years, so you know you're doing something right.
Yeah, you know, obviously, you know, you try to model yourself on people who may have come before you. But obviously, in terms of what we were doing at the time, there weren't that many people up north for us to model ourselves on. You know, we were at the start of some of these urban scenes, and we created the idea of going to that city, you know, putting on coaches. You know, prior to us, yeah, people might have done coaches like drum and bass events like Milton Keynes or other places down south. But going to a city like, say, Preston, putting on an event, and there was coaches coming from Manchester ACS, you know, they have African Caribbean Society.
I remember that.
Yeah, or places come from Liverpool ACS, you know, or people coming up from Birmingham ACS, like, right, on a Tuesday night, get into the student union, we'll all meet up there, 2-3 coaches coming. Doesn't happen nowadays. Wasn't happening before our time. You know, the Asians had, my mate Tony, Untouchables, he used to do something called the Asian Ball, and he was the guy, you know, so he would say, look, guys, we hooked up with Tony, started doing some Bangor Nation versus R&B Nation, and then with that Bangor Crasher, Gate Crashers, but, you know, but he had a formula of his networks, doesn't matter if they're in Leicester, Coventry, Preston, you know, speaking to the right people in that university, getting them all networked. Some of them were friends, family from wherever they're from Blackburn, or they were from Birmingham, they were from Newcastle, or whatever. But when they went to uni, it was a good link up, you know. So some kids these days are now trying to do link ups. They'll put it as, you know, some of the friends from that university might come up for the weekend or for an event. But no, we have thousands, you know, when we did this, we have thousands of people coming from different cities and descending on, you know, right, this month we're doing Barcelona's outside Leeds, in between Leeds and Bradford. You know, that was people don't do it no more. People get a bit like, oh, I get an Uber into town. what do you mean? We had to meet up 5 o'clock. We're going to get on a coach and we're going to go there, like 50 people on this coach for a night out on a Tuesday night. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And it was the case, that was the norm, 2 or 3 times a semester, that would be the case, but that don't happen no more. So, yeah, interesting times.
When you close your eyes at night and you think of those nights, the music, crowd, energy, what do you feel?
Yeah, to me, this is one of the reasons why I didn't end up finishing my PhD, because, okay, I did 1 year, and then it was a case of, this is what I really want to do, for whatever reasons, political reasons, I wasn't able to carry it on in the second year, but I deferred it. But in terms of the buzz, there's nothing better. I love DJing, and people ask me, hey, on a Saturday night, you actually leave your house sometimes at 3 a.m. to go down to the club and do a quick couple of hours set, and then before somebody else carries on and does the 5 till 7 set. When we used to open, this Saturday is going to be our 18th birthday, but when we used to open, it was called Lounge 31, it was a case of, I used to love doing the 5 o'clock till 6:30 slot. Back then we were only allowed to open until 6:30, but then we got till 7 now. But I used to love doing the last set, because I was from a place where later on it was a case of, you're on a journey on a night, and then the crescendo, you get people to a point, and then it's the case of you slow it down with your slow jams, you know what I mean? You're like in 90s soul and all that sort of thing. So it was cool. Then I was able to play the music what I really enjoy, your Mary J. Blige, your Keith Sweats, all that sort of stuff. Okay, R. Kelly was allowed then, but all those sort of tunes are just like classics. So yeah, I enjoyed it.
Do you miss it? Do you miss, just being behind the decks and having a simple life without all the business stress of running this empire that you've got now?
What do you call it, an empire? Bloody hell. But yeah, no, the buzz, like I said, what gets me out, sometimes I'm just happy to be at home just watching Netflix, or any other good station out there. But I love my programs. I love chilling out. Obviously being in the clubs for all this time, when I'm not out or when I'm not working, I'm happy to either just go to the cinema, I love my movies, or just be at home, chilling out. But yeah, I DJ now just for the buzz, but the best buzz was always doing the events. There was nothing better than saying, looking at your tickets or looking how well you've done in advance, or, people asking, like Tina, I don't know if you know Tina West, good legend, but she's in her family, they have a group called Blacker Group, but their sound system is most venues in the city centre use their stuff, but Tina was the go-to person. If you wanted a coach, if you wanted to get people to move from this city to that city, she would be doing a coach. So she'll do 50. Then she'll like, oh, Ed or Andy or P, I need another book of tickets. Tina, are you sure you're going to sell that? It's so Wednesday night, are they really going to come all the way to Sheffield? She's like, yeah, no problem. Then she sell another. And then it'd be a case of, yeah, my friends from whatever town, can they run a coach for you? So that was the buzz. The buzz of seeing people from different cities and different towns being brought together. That's one of the things what I feel was one of the biggest achievements which me and my brothers and the team put together. So yeah, the biggest buzz I would get after DJing was seeing a queue outside, and just thinking we were, we did this, together, wherever we were working, that, we brought people from multiple cities, multiple towns, and they come to enjoy what we put together. So yeah, that is still the best memories, even till today, that's why we did it. And that's why, looking back, I think it was worthwhile.
So every journey has setbacks. Everybody goes through them. What's been the darkest period of your career and how did you find your way through it? Dig deep, Eddie.
Oh, the darkest period was, there was one time at an event, where people say within a moment, how things can change just like that.
Yeah.
And that happened one time. I don't mind, after all these years, over 20 years ago now. And it was a case of, we just put on an event. It was up in Leeds. And again, we'd done multiple events there. And it was a case of the managers come to us. It's around half an hour to go. So at that time, I think clubs, we were until that place, until 4 maybe. And it was a case of, yeah, here's a nice bottle for you guys, well done. So this is what they'll sometimes give you then, like nice expensive bottle of champagne. Thanks for, getting me my, getting me my Christmas bonus, and like in February already because I've hit target, And it was like, all right, yeah. All right, no problem. And I'm thinking, there's still 45 minutes to go. And this isn't, ever since then, I've never, until it's over, until the night is done, it's not done. Yeah. So we were buzzing, another successful event there. I think the capacity was 2,200. I think we had around 2,400 in there. And yeah, we smashed it, we were all just ready to like cash up, and then head back home to where, where we all live. And again, those days, it was mainly cash. So, it was a case of like, you take that car, go out that door, I'll go out that door, and X, Y, Z, And we're just about to do that. And then somebody goes, what was that? And everyone's like, I don't know. And then you just see everyone just rushing. And then it took around 5-10 minutes to realise that there'd been a shooting.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a case of like, wow, can't believe this. And then within the space of being on such a high, being on such a buzz, we were on such a roll then, yeah. And then it just all tumbled, just within a space of a few moments. And it was a case of, what's going on? And then eventually ended up that, this guy in the club, unfortunately, passed away.
Cool.
So it was a case, that's the first time, something like that I'd ever experienced that. But in the meantime, while that was happening, people were then just trying to like, the police had come in, the ambulance was coming in, people were being asked to leave, on the safe and, I won't say civilized manner, but, a calm manner. So we had to stay for a little while, give, what evidence, what we could do. But by that time, it wasn't really nothing to do with us. We were all in the office. The night was virtually done. It was down to the security at that point. People were leaving within half an hour. But what the story was, is these security took the eye of the ball for a few minutes to let this guy come into the club who hadn't been searched, and then don't know what had happened, pop, like that. So, again, obviously the police weren't putting nothing on ourselves, but it was a sad, end to that guy's life. And obviously a sad time for his parents who, their son had gone out for just a night out and never returned. Whatever it was, I don't know what the backstory was, and even all these years, but ultimately, we'd put something on. We brought lots of people together, from a business-wise, it was one of the most successful events we'd had. It was a very profitable night. But, what's money? What was that money at the end of the night when, we were driving back and it was guys, we can't believe this. What had happened? And, it wasn't about pointing fingers afterwards. Obviously, history shows that it was that door team. I don't know if they ended up losing that venue and other venues, but ultimately, people then wanted somebody to blame. Back in those days, the police were saying, these type of events, these type of promoters, luckily the manager at the time, he stood up and said, well, look, these guys have done X amount over the years, we'll take it on the chin. It was, to security, it was a lapse, it was managed to get into the venue, with that weapon, but people don't want to hear that, they will put it two and two together, or black event, or that promoter, or this type of music. That's why this person died. Not that it was down to the procedures of, we'd already paid for metal detectors. We'd already paid for extra searches, it was very tight. And like I said, there was only half an hour left, but this person hadn't been in the venue prior to that time, and that one moment of not following them procedures. And this is why, we say, until the night's done, it's not done.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is, within one moment, real high to a dark place, so nothing can really, from that was the lowest point.
Wow. Follows on to my next question, actually. Did you ever feel underestimated, or that you had to fight twice as hard as anyone else just to prove yourself, especially after that moment?
Well, yeah, even like I said, that was the lowest point, like you just said there. So, like in anything, literally, I won't name names out there, but, it's like cancel culture. You're at a point where it's a case of literally, managers who before would be like all over you, it's like not taking your call, or it's like, yeah, that event on the Boxing Day, I'll come back to you on it, Ed. Or, this other thing, what you already got lined up. Yeah, come and see us next week. So there was a lot of that for periods where, we were in with that chain of venues, and they were the biggest chain in the country at the time. But that soon changed after that. It was a case of like, even though it was our security, even though you paid us X amount for extra doorman, even though you'd done what you'd done previous, on that night, it was almost as if it was our fault. And it was a case of like, come on, mate, what really happened, but he was a pawn. He wasn't going to stick his neck out for us. End of the day, somebody died, and the powers that be were trying to say, well, look, somebody needed to be a scapegoat. And, like licensing people, first thing they like to throw underneath the bus if you've got trouble on your venue is the security team, the door team. Right, get rid of your door team. It was their fault. Then the next team they like to throw underneath the bus is the promoter or what event you had on. So it was a case of, that was the promoter. That was the type of night, for you to keep our license, and for you to keep your job, don't put none of these sort of things on again, and that promoter, all right, okay, even though it's made us a lot of money, realistically, no, can't really do that no more. So, that was made life very tough for for a foreseeable time, and so with it was a chance for us to not take people's word. Don't matter if they say, yeah, we're used to these type of events, or we know what we're doing. It's like, no. We're not now taking the risk. It's our name, it's our reputation. Let's see this. Let's sit down together. I want to see you, door team, or, I want to vet this. We want to see what your procedures are, because if not, no, we're not putting our name, our reputation, our customers, these are, people who are traveling, getting their hair done, nice outfits, coming with their friends and family, it's to go home and get home that night. They're only coming out to hear a bit of music, socialise and go home. So, no, we'd rather not do that. As much money as we made that night, that's still, even now, like 20 odd years later, it still haunts me that, sometimes, I don't blame the venue. It wasn't their fault that this mindless idiot came with that weapon. But at that point, when the door team turned their backs and thought, yeah, the night's done, people are going to start leaving soon, this guy then walked in, but that just goes to show, until the night is done, until that last customer's out, it's not done. So, yeah.
Running multiple businesses means constant pressure. How have you managed your ambition with your mental and emotional health?
A few years ago, I would have laughed at you like mental, and emotional. I'm like, what's this woke nonsense? But, it's 2025. I've got to move with the time and pretend I know what I'm talking about. I'm only messing. No, it's serious, end of the day where I might not have felt, for somebody that, take their emotions into considerations, or the mental, considerations, it's real. Maybe I was suppressing some of the things years gone by, but some friends, some family, some people who were close to us, where come on, pull it together, or come on, what you doing? We need you to do this, or we need you to do that. I'm doing it, so you could do it. But no. One, we're all different, and two, something what might affect me in one way might be affecting somebody in a more, more problematic way. So I'm now in 2025, see things a lot different than I did years ago. The pressures of, I could handle, going to uni, then putting on a night, DJing, and then wake up the next morning to get to my class or to tutor one of my classes. That was fine, but then there was others in the team, who, looking back now, that did cause them, I didn't think about the time, a bit of stress, in the end, one of them burnt out a little bit, to the point where they were like, guys, it's kind of taking its toll on us, all these late hours, all these nights where we're going up and down Oxford Road, postering on every lamppost, on every bus stop, on every phone box, there used to be phone boxes. Yeah. So, but those were the best places, and then it was a case of going to B&Q, cutting down A2 size cardboard boxes, wood, yeah, plywood. And then we get them to chop it down, and then you'd have to get the glue paste on them, then put the pulses on them, then just go around all the traffic lights, and then do the cable ties, and do that before the police come. Yeah, guys, what you doing? So it was a case of you start down that way, you take 10, Ed, you take 10, you go this way, and it was a case of okay, and we'll meet at the middle, yeah. But make sure you do it facing this way, so when that people who come from that side, you're going to get them, and then make sure you're doing all that. So people might think, no, that's not that technical, but it was. So ultimately, there used to be many kind of battles where you'd have to wake up at a certain time, because once, we weren't one of them people who were rip somebody else's posters down. Yeah, some people used to get a slap for that. Yeah, but ultimately, that was the scene, But if you got your poster in a key part, for argument's sake, if people are in Manchester, Oxford Road now, near where the just past the academy, if you're coming into town, before you get to the swimming pool, yeah, that junction there, before you get to Man Met, yeah, so you turn right toward the Apollo or left towards Moss Side, that junction there was golden. Yeah, before you then get towards the town centre, then before you get to Arches and the Oxford Road train station, again, there's a spa there. That junction was golden. So if you had your board on that traffic light, you were the one. As soon as somebody's gig was done, yeah, twist it, get it off and put yours there. But if not, it was a case of, wow, somebody's got theirs on right, we need to go to the next, traffic lights, and hopefully they haven't put it on there. And then it's the case of, we'll do this one. And then, just keep an eye on what date that one runs out. And that night, as soon as the night's on, rip it down, put hours up. So, the stress like that. So ultimately, it might not seem like it was, very taxing, but knowing oh, I've got to get to B&Q before it shuts. Oh, we've got to speak to them and see if they're going to cut them, because sometimes some B&Qs wouldn't cut down the wood, they'll just sell you the wood. So then we're then trying to get a saw to saw these, wood boards down to certain size, and then upholster on there, then get them up. And then it was a case of, you've got to do it at a certain time, and then you'd have to finish, then get to bed, then wake up for uni. So in the end, it did take its strain. When you're talking about mental health, and emotions. And again, then after doing all that work, sometimes some of these events didn't work, so you sometimes do all that work and it'll be a case, not just the financial side, because obviously, like you said, some of them were still at uni or were using this money to help finance some of your expenses. And like I said, some of my money was to help to finance my PhD. But after that, it was a business. It was to then finance the things that I was trying to accrue, and get on the ladder of other things that I wanted to own. So there was always that pressure. But in terms of being able to ride it through, I was always fortunate because I had my older brother involved and I had my younger brother involved. So some people are like, what's it like working with your brothers? That's probably the reason why we're still, carried on, because there were many dark times. Obviously that one where I was telling you about Leeds, that was, a dark period. But there was another period where we did, thought we'd go to the next level. We went to somewhere like Milton Keynes, that was 4,000 people, But that event, was a case like, can we do it? Can we pull it off? And there were certain reasons. It was an August bank holiday. But if we'd done our strategy correct, we wouldn't have done that event. There were certain reasons that August bank holiday is not a good one to do. People in Leeds Carnival, people at Nottingham Carnival. So doing Milton Keynes, people will come out. The lineup was pretty tough. And it was a case of like, yeah, let's still do it. But something back where I was like, should we really do this? Or should we not? And it's only years later on, I'm not a philosopher or nothing, but my brother's more on that. And he sometimes says, look, you need to listen to what one of the best or the biggest investors in the world says. He goes, I call Warren Buffett, says, the reason why he's so successful is not the deals, he does. Yeah, that's the biggest mistake. Like I said, it's meant to say the biggest investor in the world. It's the deals that you don't do. So that's why he's so successful and makes so much money. Yeah? And that one event costs us £50,000. So that next day, so bank holiday on Monday, when people are either going Nottingham Carnival for the second day or Leeds Carnival for the second day, we were all sat in a hotel what we couldn't hardly afford to pay for. And we're just thinking, let's just get back to Manchester. And, we'll worry about this 50 grand what we're in the hole for later. But that, and the funny thing is, that was 2002, me, Andy and Pete, took us around to pay that off. One of our key guys, one of our key people, he helped underwrite some of that for us. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here till today. So we got a lot of respect and love for that guy. And he knows who he is, and it's a case of, he was self-made and he always wanted to help us guys. So he was like, look, wherever I can help you, I will do, just call me. And he's like our big brother. So that was, that was 2 years of pain, but, we said, we'll stick to it. We could have thrown in the towel then. We could have then said, look, nah, we tried a little thing, tried to go to the next level. We put our money's where our mouth is, and, it cost us 50 grand losses, and that was the case of, emotionally, mentally, some of us didn't carry on after that, but myself, Andy and Pete, we did. We were like, look, we're not gonna, we're on the hook though for 50 grand, we're not gonna, turn our backs on that. Obviously, as a family friend, like our big brother, but we weren't ever going to be like, oh, having that money back. That was never a consideration. But we wanted to do stuff what made it get his money back sooner than, it would have been if we just said, look, we're just going to get a job now, and I'll pay this amount out of mine, and he'll pay this out of his, and Pete will pay that. So that was a dark time, and that emotionally, and looking back now, I don't know if we could turn the clock back now 23 years, we might have done the same. But ultimately, at a principle, the fact that we were responsible for it, that was one of the times where we all stuck together. We said, look, what do we do, guys? Do we call it a day, or do we knuckle down, reassess, and get back to the basics? This on formula, on paper, it looked all right. But if you'd done all, your due diligence properly, we would have said, no, don't do that event. It might be not the one. Yeah? So that was one where now we're more careful, due to things like that. So it's the deals you don't do, yeah, which is why we're still here today, because sometimes the wrong decision, you know, that could be the end of you.
So, when the music fades away and it's just you, what keeps you grounded?
Family, you know. I'm so lucky, you know. And said, you know, we're all from Blackburn, and I've got, you know, 7 brothers and sisters. You know, there's 8 of us, and you know, and just, I can't believe how fortunate, you know, the amount of people I know who've had family members, brothers, sisters, or parents pass away, you know, at younger age. You know, it's such a blessing. I wake up every day, you know, when I was younger, one of the only times I ever saw my dad in tears. I think it's still the only time now. I must have been maybe 10 or 11. And then I've gone in the front room. Dad's crying. And I'm like, to my brother, I'm like, why is Dad crying? He's never cried. He goes, oh, his older brother's died. He was in a car crash back in Nigeria. And then I speak to my mum's upset, you know, and she liked that uncle. And she was like, oh, your dad's brother's passed away. But it's extra sad because it's exactly 5 years since his other brother died as well. And it was like, wow. So it was just like a shock. So he said, oh, your dad's taking it pretty bad. So, and then there's been occasions where some of my mum's siblings have passed away. And then I look at friends who are in my generation, and some of their parents or siblings have been unfortunate. So some of my cousins, that's happened, and some of my close friends, they've had family members who've died. So what keeps me grounded is that me, you know, I'm 50, my other brothers, you know, I've got 3 older brothers, I've got 1 younger brother, you know, I've got 3 younger sisters, but they're all over 40 now, but we're all together, you know. So the fact that is what keeps me grounded, that ultimately, my dad's now 91. Don't know my mum's exact age, but she's younger. But it's a case of, for as long as they're around, I need to be around. You know, I've now got 3 children. You know, they keep me grounded. You know, that is what drives me every morning when I wake up, because we don't know how long we've got, you know. And even now, it could be any week, but this particular week, you know, I've had 2 people who've had one of the parents pass away this week, and it's a case of like, wow, can't believe it. So yeah, what grounds me is you got to do as much as you can whilst you can, you know, and it's for the other, you know, it's for the people around you. So even if I'm not here tomorrow, you know, I hopefully I've done enough. So when I leave, you know, they'll say, yeah, it was all right. It was all right. You tried, you know, and that's basically it.
When things weren't going right, who was there for you, and how did you pick yourself back up?
Again, it comes down to family. You know, it helps that my closest friends, you know, and the people I speak to the most every day in business and personal life are my brothers, yeah, my wife. Yeah, I'd say that's what's got me through it. You know, those are the people who, without them, you know, yeah, I couldn't get through each day.
So, after being in the entertainment industry for years, you then made a step and emerged and jumped into the world of hospitality. You own how many restaurants and bars at the moment?
Well, 4.
4 restaurants and bars in Manchester. Big move. How did you get into that? And what drove you to get into hospitality? Because it's different from the club scene. Serving food and serving records is completely different.
Yeah, well, I always think about this. Everyone needs to eat. Yeah, not everyone needs to go out to party. So if you could be doing something what people need every day, eat, or driving a cars or oil or petrol, you know, you're onto a winner, aren't you? So that's why we thought, okay, yeah, the nightclubs are fine. That's good. And the bar's an extension of that. And then food and restaurants, an extension of that. So that's where the hospitality side comes into it.
How different is it running hospitality business compared to the entertainment?
Again, it's dealing with people's needs and wants. It's more brutal nowadays on the social media side, but in terms of reviews, in terms of comments, that's what will either make or break your business. But in terms of, your transferable skills and what we'd learn, it's very similar. It's customer facing, it's customer service, it don't matter what it is. Don't matter, like we didn't know how to, when we opened the club, before we could open the club, we opened the 2 shops next to the Printworks first, and one of them was called Deli Wrap, and we'd never done anything.
Remember that?
So we'd never done anything about doing like wraps, and people were like saying, yeah, but why can't you do it on a burger? So no, we want to do something different, something a little bit healthier. So this was back in 2006, and we're thinking, there's no apartments, that's going to be a big thing in years to come. We thought, okay, let's service these people around here. So we've got a convenience store next door. We've been able to 24-hour license. So why don't we then start doing deliveries to the apartments above us and around within a mile radius? So okay, and this is, yeah, that could work. So then we got a van. So the shop next door was called Convenience Express, but the food side was going to be something where when people were on the way to work, they could get some food, and then people after the clubs and the bars, they can get some food, or if they didn't want to go out, just call this number and we'll deliver it to you. So this was before your deliveries, this was before your Uber Eats and all the other ones. So that was interesting, and see it all go full circle now, and the amount of more city centre apartments. But, the food aspect, that was just the takeaway side of it. But then it was always the case, well, eventually we'd like to have, sit-down restaurants and other, catering businesses. So that's all. It wasn't our goal to be, into restaurants or this, that and the other. But it was something, just a natural extension. It's not our main thing, but, we dabble.
What food do you say about your restaurants and what are they called?
The best way to call it, the main one at the moment is called Evoden, and that's on Beach Road in Cholton. And that's like soul food and the Caribbean flavours.
Nice.
So, the ladies behind that, it's her brainchild, Miss D, I love that food. Look, I'm Nigerian, but yeah, some of you Caribbean people know how to cook. And they tasted nice and lovely.
Maybe one day we'll have a little taster session right here in the studio. The Eddie Burger.
Oh, yeah. The Eddie Jerk Burger. But yeah, I think that's the number one seller at the restaurant. Yeah, the Jerk Burger.
Right, so where people know you for entertainment, music, now restaurants, but very few people know about you've been working in the care sector for over 13 years now. So I want you to explain a little bit about that, because that's actually something I'm personally passionate about as well. I found it surprising when you mentioned that, but 13 years in the care business besides the entertainment, which is still ongoing. I'll have to commend you for that, starting off. But I'd like to explain how you got into that and what's driven you to get into that.
For this one, I can't take the credit for this. And a lot of the times, a lot of the ideas and innovation was the older brother Andy. He, at one point, he was like saying, guys, what's happened? There was an experience back in 2011 where there's an incident outside the venue and the police wanted to close it down. And that was, the irony is, it happened on the day we were going to open our second ever venue, and that was going to be in Burnley. So on that night, the police came. It was somewhat in the end, we got the license back a couple of months later, and we had to make different changes. But ultimately, they never wanted us there in the first place. That was its biggest challenge. They didn't want a nightclub in the city centre of Manchester open so late, and it's going to be orientated to an urban crowd. So they were always after it, gunning for us from day one. But what we needed to then do was a case of, well, that was our main earner. You know, myself, family friend who owns the business with us, Mr. Biggs, and Pete. Yeah, I mean, that was our main income. You know, so we had the shops next door, but the main money was coming from the nightclub. And then that one incident shut, you know, the police knew what they were doing. We were shut. That happened at the last weekend in November. So by the time we were able to do anything, they said, oh yeah, this place is such a bad place. It has to be shut down immediately. So we weren't even allowed to open the week after. Then they made sure that they delayed the court case. So we weren't even allowed to open in December. You know, your biggest earner is New Year's. At that time, people used to go out a lot on New Year's. So it was dark days. And then January, obviously, people ain't got much money, you know. So January was always going to be quieter, but we weren't even allowed to open in January. So for then 2 months, it was a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. So all our eggs were kind of in one basket, really. It was all on the nightclubs and the bars. So like I said, we just opened a bar, Hot Shots, in that very night this incident happened was the opening night in Burnley. You know, we invested a lot of money to open the place in Burnley. And then it was a case of that needed a bit of time to get going. So we were trying to use the money, what we were making from this venue, to pay for that venue. So when this shut down, we were in a situation where this place was newly open and there was bigger competition, bigger venues in Burnley. We weren't the biggest place there, so we had competition there. So it was going to be a struggle, which it was. So that didn't get off to the best start because at the back of our minds, our main breadwinner, our main cash cow had been shut down. And then there was also the legal fees, what we were then needing to find, you know, which is a nightmare. Anybody who's had any legal battles know that, you know, that could just kill you, just, you know, just getting a phone call, just getting an email, just getting somebody to represent you, you know. And it was something that important to us that we needed to go to, the, you know, the best, you know, law firm in the time, the licensing one, and the called Kites. And there was a case of they weren't cheap. You know, well, you know, just for to take this case, you need to pay this. You know, and we were like, where are we going to get this money to pay this? Just for them to say, well, okay, you paid this, but our advice is this, that, and the other. Well, that's not what we want to say. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that, you know, so that's, so that was the start of, guys, this can't happen again. You know, that's your main livelihood. And when the police allowed us to open, you know, they cut our feet. They cut us down where they wanted us. They put us in a box where it's a case of we'd open a late night venue for people of the city and the north to come and enjoy. You know, it was a case of what is one of your biggest attractions? And it was the 630 license. You know, forget your circles, forget your BGs. None of them had our license, you know, unless you wanted to go to a casino or to the gay village, you know, we were the spot.
Yeah.
You know, and even now, 18 years on, you know, it doesn't matter. Everybody who wants to go out late in the city knows the lounge or Lounge 31, call it whatever you want. You know, that is our reputation. So we fought for that, but for a while, the police were saying, no, you got to shut by 3 o'clock. And then that just killed the whole business model. You know, killed the people who will go Circle first, or will go Dean's Gate first, or will go these places first, but they'd all still end up at our place, yeah? But we're only getting there for 3, we're only getting there for 3. So for such a long time, that core market, they were coming, the shutters were down. All the time, like, Ed, yeah, I'm bringing whoever over, or this, that, and the other. Like, but Ed, why is it not? And it was depressing. That was dark days, you know, but darker than that was a case of it could happen again.
Yeah.
So at that point, my brother took the idea of, like, look, we need to diversify. We need to do something totally different, you know, and he then got connected with other people who had been doing stuff in the community. They've been doing stuff in Moss Side. They've been doing stuff in South Manchester. They've lived that life. They've lived that experience of speaking to people who might have taken a wrong decision at one point in their life, or people who didn't have the best parents and best start to life. He connected with these two individuals, and they're private people, these guys. And Andy, again, he was at the point where he left it to me and my younger brother and Biggs to deal with the club, you know, and the shop, what was open, you know, standard shift was 12 hours, you know, you open, you get the milk in, you get the papers in, you wait for delivery to come from whichever places are bringing the pies and the sausage rolls. All right, so I'm there at 6:30 in the morning. Yeah, okay. You take the papers in, and then, okay, the cleaner's coming to the nightclub at 8 o'clock, so you might as well stay there. And then, you know what, you might as well stay there until 6 o'clock in the afternoon, because we're not opening the nightclub till 10. But if you stay there, go to the cash and carry if you haven't got something what's been delivered by, you know, our suppliers, you know, and then the next person could come on, because we're open until 6:30 at night. If that person starts at, say, 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, they may as well work through till the next morning, close at 6:30. By the time you finish cashing up, that'll be like 8 o'clock in the morning. Well, you might as well let the people who are in the shop next door in, and then you might as well do the returns for the newspapers. So it's like, wow. So for the first year, you know, the lounge is 18 years old, but the site is 19 years old. You see, we had it for 1 year before we were able to afford to open the nightclub. So we've been doing that on the grind for 19 years now. So ultimately, it was a case of, you guys can handle that, which is fine, but Andy still used to do his bit. But he was still involved with other things, which was bringing money in to subsidise and help. Yeah. And Biggs' dad was the same. He had a shop in Fallowfield. And he was then subsidising their half. Yeah, it was a joint venture. But it was a case of, whilst Biggs and his family had some other shops and other businesses and income stream, we were at that time reliant just on that site and Withy Grove. Obviously, Burnley just opened, but it wasn't generating enough to be paying my salary and my brother's salary. So Andy, along with these guys, you know, said, look, rather than it just being just mentoring, rather than it just being, you know, certain contracts, a month contract going into that school, speaking with that young kid, or, you know, this child, helping this person who can't be with their parents for whatever reason, you know, seeing what guidance you can do. It was a case of, well, they thought together, there's a business here, you know, let's see if we can get a house, get some staff who could be with this child, YP, young person, and see if by mentoring them, by housing them, by taking them out of the environment what they were in, if we could give them a better life, you know. And these people, you know, were seen as, all right, what you guys are doing is fine. You know, some of the troubles, what some of these younger people have had, you lot have experienced it. They'll listen to you guys, you know, not going to try it on. They're not going to try to pull the wool over your eyes. So this is the background, what these two guys had. And then obviously Andy's from a procedures background. So it's a case, but how can we model this and make it a business? So we can go to certain councils, we can go to certain local authorities and say, look, with these children, they're not bad children. Don't just throw away the key and just send them to young offenders place. You know, if you're giving them a chance, we could do something where we could help change, you know, their lives. You know, that's what these lot did. So from one child to two children, to going into schools and mentoring these, you know, so they can stay at their mum's and dad's house, but sometimes they just can't cope. These lot were trying to say, well, don't take them necessarily out of that environment. Maybe one day a week we can have them, or we can put on certain courses what could give them some sort of aspiration. So that's what they did. So I'm not going to take the credit. It wasn't my baby. It's not my baby now. But like I said, me and my two brothers, you know, we're involved in that care side heavily. And that is, you know, something which we're all strongly believe in, because it's for the young children, you know, they're the next generation. And, you know, I don't necessarily believe that, oh, you know, these people are, oh, they're bad apples, just leave them, you know. No. You know, nobody's ever, okay, there's the odd one or two exceptions, but, you know, in general, nobody's ever that bad where you can't without a bit of guidance, steer or change their lives. And some of them, it's not sometimes their fault. So, it's outside of the business is, it blows my mind sometimes, some of the cases, what I hear. But, I'm grateful that we're strong in the sector now.
Interesting. How do you manage switching from this high energy entertainment to next day being, apologies. How do you manage switching from being in a nightclub one night, high energy entertainment, to the next day, being all compassionate, it's all about care. Like, to the big switch.
Well, the answer to that is easy. I don't, we got to a situation where my older brother Andy, he deals with all that side. That's his problem. That's his headache. He'll deal with getting that phone call on Christmas Day one year where something bad had happened to one of the YPs. That's his Christmas Day. We're all about to watch Only Fools and Horses. Yeah, we're all about, trying to get a little bit of a buzz after watching EastEnders and being depressed, And then it's a case of like, all right, we're all sitting for like Christmas dinner. Then he gets a call, something bad's happened. And it's like, we're all sat round there, but he's taking that on his shoulders and he's dealing with that. And my sister at the time, I think she was involved in the business as well, Emma. But she dealt with, she was in, social work and dealing with children as well. That's their life. But me and Peter, we deal with a different type of headache. Like you were trying to say, how do you switch from somebody, we're coming in, what do you mean we have to pay? What do you mean we can't come with trainers? That level of stress, threats, let's call it what it is. These are certain people who, for whatever reason, they could have £1,000 in the pocket, but they don't want to put £5 down to come in. But they'll try and show the big one when they're inside, like, what do you want? But 10 minutes ago, you didn't want to pay in. You caused an issue trying to get it. I said, look, end of the day, guys, work together. If you want to come in here because you know it's going to be a good night, work with us. And we're not trying to disrespect you nothing, but we've got conditions on our license. This is what we need to do to remain open. You want to be part of it or you don't. Because either way, there's ways things are going to get dealt with here. Because ultimately, this is what pays our mortgage. Yeah. This is what pays all them people in their jobs. There's X amount of people who rely on us being here. So we're going to have to deal with this. So let's talk. That level where people are like, well, I don't want to go. Look, I don't like being threatened. You know what I mean? We've been threatened with our people, followers and all that sort of nonsense. But ultimately, that's what you needed to do to keep an urban venue in the city centre going at that time. Because certain people wanted to be a part of it or try to get a piece of it. But no, we're not on that. Yeah? End of the day, this is what we need to do because there's people above us, who don't want this to succeed. And they're waiting for that final little thing so they can come down and say, look, you didn't do that. So it's not worth the headache. I'd rather just talk to you outside. You don't want to talk to me. That means we've got a problem. Then you can then talk with somebody else because it's not going to be with me. So that level of headache is one thing. But then when you got this sort of thing where these people have been involved in maybe grooming or this person has been tampered with or this person has had the parents lost or whatever, that's real. Yeah. My stuff, at the end of the day, if I got home and nobody's followed me home, I'm all right. Turn on the TV and chill, until the next week. But these other things on the other side of the business, that's real stress. That's real headache. And like I said, how do I cope? I don't, thankfully. My brother deals with that side of the business. Me and Pete, obviously, it's part of the company, it's part of what we do. But on a day-to-day, I'm not hands-on on that side. So I'm thankful I don't need to deal with that because some of the cases blow my mind.
You've provided jobs, mentorship, community support. What does giving back mean to you now compared to when you started many years ago?
Yeah, again, that's what we do. I had a friend, DJ Miller. I hadn't seen him for a while. And he calls me up a couple of weeks ago and he goes, yeah, Ed, my nephew's trying to get into the scene. He's trying to get into DJing. Do you mind putting him on? I know you guys are busy or this, that, and the other. I was like, look, Miller, somebody like you who was down there when we were doing Brownsuga Family, you know, playing at the Old Monk or Pressure or wherever we were together, you know what I mean? I said, look, it's not an issue. You know, okay, he's into God now. You know, I'm not laughing at that in that sense, but in the sense that, you know, he's moved away from the nightclub side. You know, he doesn't look down on myself or anybody who's still wanting to do that scene, but it's not for him. But he was still wanting to reach out for his nephew to look at, you know, used to this sort of stuff. And I said, look, Miller, still the same. Somebody's up and coming and they want a chance, they want a break, you know, would do that all day long. You know, that's on, you know, the clubbing side. But in the same token, we've got so many people who would say, oh, Ed, I've got this family member coming over, they're studying, they need a job. Again, you know, if there's a job going or if there's space, I'd gladly give them a job. You know, I'm all about helping people, you know, not just out of like some sort of higher purpose, but it's a case of why not? You know, why not help somebody else if you've got the ability to help somebody else?
2025. What does success look like to you? Is it financial, emotional, or something deeper maybe?
Yeah, not a shallow person. It's got to be something deeper.
But the financial, the good, yeah.
Yeah, the financial. Look, things could be better. Things could always be better. You know, we're definitely not there yet. You know, if we're looking at it from year to year, you know, when you're looking at people trying to do financial returns and your accounts and stuff like that, you know, 2025 has been a tough year. I won't lie. You know, people ain't got the money what they had, you know, even 12 months ago. So it's a case of looking for different revenue streams, what can help maintain the, you know, income, what I've been trying to get used to, and more. That's where we're at. But as well as just the financial side, there's other things what you want to get out of life as well, which that's where I'm kind of at as well. So, yeah, so what is success? Success is, you know, the house is okay, you know, the cars are okay. Yeah, you know, that's cool. But it's more than that. I'm not a superficial guy, but definitely not made it. I still need to, like, you know, month to month, like, oh, the mortgage this month or this payment this month. So, yeah, definitely not there yet, but, you know, I'm not going to give up.
Do you ever see a connection between, you know, the multiple ventures that you have, entertainment, business, hospitality, care? You seem to be serving people in different aspects, but do you ever see a connection?
It's funny you should say that. I've never seen it like that. You know, Jay, you know,
wisdom.
That must be the connection. Yeah, and that's being truthful. Yeah, it must be to do with the people. It might sound funny, but if I was to look at the amount of people we employ over 100 people across our different businesses. You know, and when we look at that and you think, wow, 100 people. Yeah, I don't know them all. You know, I'm not trying to say I know everyone who works for all our different businesses, but you're right. We are dealing with businesses where they are front facing. Yeah, we are on the front line, whether it's the care homes, yeah, whether it's working with the children, whether it's now we're in the cleaning business now. You know?
Oh,
yeah.
A few things we missed out that you kept under the wrap steady.
Yeah, well, you know, like cleaning halls of residences, which is kind of funny. But only in the sense, like, again, it's some people who may have been cleaning, say, some of the care homes or some of the nightclubs, but, you know, it's another job. It's another thing where that transferable skills from this to that, you know, we're capable of doing it. We're able to use some of our skills and talent to move it to something else. But again, it is down to the people, you know, like cleaning halls of residence. Yeah, you're not seeing the students because they haven't moved in yet. But either way, the people, the connection sides that are the workers, the staff, you know, so that they're happy to work again. And some of our other ventures, and yeah, you're right. Yeah, Jay, that's the connection. It is all about the people.
When people speak about Eddie Down 20 years from now, how do you want to be remembered? And do you want to be remembered as Eddie Down or your real name, which I still don't even know?
My real name is Edward or Doodoo.
There you go. It's Eddie or Doodoo.
Or Eddie or Doodoo. Yeah, look, obviously, I'm not a celeb. I'm not somebody who's like, yeah, AKA this, AKA that. But yeah, Eddie Down is the front-facing side of the entertainment and hospitality side. Yeah, but Edward or Doodoo or Eddie or Doodoo, yeah, that's what I want to be remembered for. Obviously, the business side of it is beyond just being a DJ or being a promoter. All the things what helped us get to where we're at today and the other businesses and the other achievements. So yeah, that's really what I really want to be remembered for. Not that, we used to go partying in that town or that venue and, Eddie and his brothers used to put on this event or that event. That's nice. That was a moment in history. Some of the people got some nice memories, but, it's what we're building on and what we're building towards, which ultimately in 20 years' time, hopefully that's what people will remember.
What's one lesson you had to learn that you would pass on to younger entrepreneurs and DJs of today?
I'd say learn the trade, study the game. Ultimately putting up posters on a lamppost, going round or flying at whatever time in the morning when it's raining or when it's snowing, or putting flyers on cars, it's old school, but things are changing, nowadays, all this AI stuff, which is his own minefield, but these younger people are going to have to move with the times. If this is the new way of doing stuff or DJing or promoting, learn the game, study it, master it, and then, do it well. Yeah.
It's funny because you were mentioning going out, putting posters up, going out early in the morning, because I get out this hour, and it reminds me of Instagram, TikTok, posting at the right time, the algorithm. You've got to get out and put the poster up by 7. Was it like that? But that what it was like you've got to get it out by a certain time. And
yeah, sometimes we had uni that morning at 9 o'clock. So yeah, you'd have to try to do it beforehand, because again, things like now it's a case of you're going to need to be posted by this time, or the most time would be at half time between a Man United or Liverpool games or whatever, because that's when everyone's like, oh, that person's playing rubbish or that. But at that time, if you know it, that's when people are going to be on.
Yeah.
Or in between the breaks of Coronation Street and Emmerdale. But these are the time, that's when you'll quickly go for a brew. Like if you're making the brew, right, go on then. It's on a break. I'll go on my Insta or my Facebook or whatever social. Yeah, and that's the same with the guys. You want to hit it before the people who are on the way to work, yeah? Or on the way home from work. So it's okay you're doing it during the day, but by the time, because sometimes at that point, the police or the council will be looking to rip them down. They might not stay up all weekend, or if you get it up by a certain time on a Friday, it'll stay on there till Monday morning. That's when you'll get the call to say, we've seen all these posts, it's been done illegal, X, Y, Z, and that's before they started fining you per poster, and coming after you like that. So that was, it's all about strategy. There was no point doing certain things. If you put it on at the wrong time on a Monday morning, it wouldn't last until Monday lunchtime. So you would have spent all that money and time for nothing. So it's learning things, having procedures and following them.
After meeting many people over 30 years, high profile people, so forth, do you think success changes people or reveals who they really are?
Yeah, because some people might say, I'm successful. I think I'm all right. I'm not one to blow my own trumpet. I don't think, I'm not a waste man. Yeah, I'm not a bum, how I would describe some people. If I think, no, I'll be honest, I'm not, somebody's trying, or it don't matter where they are, where they're from, somebody's trying, it don't matter, get us in the mind. Some people get out of these places, become successful footballers or become successful artists, but they end up in prison, or they end up without all that money because they're still ghetto, they're still a bum. You can have as much money as you want, but if you want to go into that restaurant or that bar and talk to that girl behind the bar or that member of staff in a certain way, or that customer, and you think you can do what you want, you're still a bum. Don't matter if you're a US artist or a US football star or an English person who's famous for this, that, and the, you can still be a bum. Get us in the mind. You know, you could be from that estate, but you've done something about yourself, and you know that don't mean nothing. So, yeah.
If you could speak to the younger you, the one that was out there hustling, flies. I've got to call it hustling. It sounds like you were hustling patches. It's like you just that patch. But when you was out there hustling with your flies, what advice would you give to you, the younger you back then doing that?
Keep at it. Because the funny thing is, used to be a guy, you talk about hustling, we all know this guy, he used to go up and down Market Street selling CDs, mixed CDs, you know, and he'd get in and he'd burn them, and then he'll start selling DVDs. But now he's hustled that much, you know, up and down. He's now into his own clothing line. He's now into his own shoes. He's now, all, you know, he keeps saying, Ed, I've got a perfect tracksuit for you. You know, come down, come and link me. And that was a guy who used to just come by the shop. At the end of the club, he's like, right, yeah, I used to sell a lot of mixed CDs at the end of the night, you know, £5, £10. And same with us, when we were flying and hustling, you know, as you put it, that was to get ahead. We didn't want to always be out there flying. We didn't want to always be out there putting posters up, but it was to get a means to an end. So it was a case, well, we don't want to be the one where they turn around and say, look, we don't really want to do this event no more, or it's not the right type of thing what the venue's about. That's why we want to own our own things. You know, do what you need to do, get the money, but have a dream. You know, and our dream was like, I don't want to work for nobody else. You know, I don't want to be in a situation where somebody's then going to tell me one day, you know, hey, can we have a word? What do you want to talk about? Yeah, don't think it's working. You know, this, that, no, it's not about that. You know, so hustle, you know, and I always laugh when I say, yeah, you fake it till you make it, you know, but that is what the game is about. You know, okay, we all need workers, you know, not everybody can be a boss, you know, we all need doctors, we all need nurses, we all need bus drivers, we all need toilet attendants. These are jobs what we need, yeah? But you also need somebody who makes it, put it together, you know, who's like, yeah, he's the manager, you know, that doctor or that surgeon, you know, he's only as good as the lights being on so he can do his job. So you need a manager who's managing the facilities, you know, you need a boss, you need somebody who deals with the trust. So in the same as where we are, we hustled and we'll keep hustling until the day where it's a case of we don't need to hustle no more. But yeah, I hustle every day. I'm still hustling now.
It's been a lot. It's been good. Took in a lot today. Before we finish up, Eddie, there's something I've been thinking on my mind after been hearing your stories, especially before. What is the craziest thing that's ever happened to you in regards to the clubs? You were talking about getting followed home and the threats and all that stuff, and I'm like, gosh, I feel like there's a lot there that you've hidden. There's a lot of darkness there that you've hidden away. I wish that you would have, you know, spoke about. But, you know, if you could like tell us like the craziest situation, if you can, that's ever happened, you'd have to tell us who or anything. But like, you know, like, I know I can tell that, you know, some crazy stuff has happened, man. But yeah, like, what would be the craziest situation that's happened from you putting on a night or running a club?
Wow. There was a time, there was a few. There was one time when the Russians wanted to take muscle in our door, and we had some Albanian guys who were running the door at the time and said, Ed, don't worry about it. You carry on watching Casualty, but just to let you know, we'd had some Russians who tried to come down and pull some stuff on us. Okay. All right, but are you in at 10? Yeah, I've been at 10. What do you mean? Yeah, but we dealt with it, don't we? So that was a bit crazy, and just thinking that it's for nothing, but obviously looking at what's going on in the Ukraine and Russian war, it's like the Russians are different. But anyway, I didn't need to get involved, and after that, they kind of dealt with it, but that was a bit mad.
So they wanted to muscle it on the door?
Yeah, for what I know, like I said, these lot dealt with it. It was a case of, look, don't we? It's sorted. You understand? But we just thought we'd let you know. And it was like, phew, okay. So that was interesting. But one of the craziest ones is like when we did an event up in Leeds, Leeds, Evolution. And it was a case of we sold out. We sold out like a week to go. You know, they was averaging something like on a normal Friday night, maybe 1,100 across 3 rooms, and sometimes wouldn't open one of the rooms. One of my good friends, Kenny B up there in Leeds, he's like, look, we've got a venue for you. So I went out to see the venue. It was like, okay, yeah. So we'll put everyone on, you know. We'll put EZ on, we'll put Heartless Crew on, you know, in that room. Then we'll put Goldfinger on, and some guy who's, you know, a little bit of trouble, won't mention his name, in the other room, you know, with Goldfinger. Then we thought, right, the other room we'll put Fabio on Groove Ride. Just get the, you know, it doesn't matter who it is, the biggest of the best. That's what we want, man, at the time. You know, So Solid were number 1 that week. They were on there. And then we get a call on the Monday saying, after what had happened at Astoria, and there'd been some trouble with half a So Solid, the ban from doing any events in the country. So we get a call from the manager, goes, look, I know they're one of your headliners, but they're not allowed to perform this Friday night. So we were like, you what? Look on the news. And he was like, yeah, they were blacklisted, blackballed or cancelled or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, so Solid for a while weren't allowed to perform. So we were like, wow, so nearly 4,000 tickets here. You know, we're all like going on holiday after this event. And it was a case of like, you know, what we're going to do. So I was like, all right. So we spoke to the word was out there. So look, the lineup's sick. You know, anybody is coming to this. We've got coaches come from Cardiff, got coaches from London, got coaches coming down from Newcastle. Everyone was there that night. You know, people remember that November the 10th. It was cold. So we get there. And even before 10 o'clock, we told Dorman and the nightclub, like, look, we've already sold out. Just make sure you have enough Dorman. So we have 30 Dorman. You know, they're used to getting 1,100 people in on a busy Friday night. I said, look, we're going to bring 3,500 there. And then, you know, just make sure you're geared up. We're already sold out. Nobody can even pay on the door. That's it. Don't bother coming down. I get there 10 minutes before open. The queue's like half a mile long. I'm like, okay. So I get in, I park out. I goes to the manager, where are all the doormen? And he's like saying, oh, no, this will be all right. You know, we've got 6 for now. And then the rest will come in. We're staggering it till, this will be the one till 10. And then at 11, we're going to have some more. 1 second. We paid you this money in advance. Yeah? So you've had all your money. So why aren't all the doormen in? We paid for 30 doormen from 10 till 6 in the morning. So this guy was trying to, there's a guy called Richard. Yeah, so anybody who remembers Evolution and the manager called Richard at the time, this guy must be pocketing this money.
Of course.
So we're like, okay, all right, well, we're going to open on time. Yeah, no problem. The queue just gets bigger and bigger. Gets 10 o'clock, open the doors. 6 doors, and we're like, okay. And the queue just gets bigger and bigger. So everyone has to get search, metal detector and everything. And the queue's getting bigger and bigger. And it's cold. And then it starts to rain.
Oh,
my gosh. Black women and their hair.
oh.
Short skirts. Man with just T-shirts on like that.
Yeah.
Because they think, I don't want to wear a jacket in there. I want to look cool. They weren't feeling queuing up for an hour and a half. I've got a ticket. We've all got a ticket.
Yeah.
We need to get in there. Half an hour later, the queue's even bigger. People are now getting frustrated. You know, a lot of these were young girls. A lot of them were students because that was our core market. Students. You can't have these young students, you know, queuing up for an hour and a half in the cold, freezing rain. You know, there's a health and safety risk. Next thing we know, the police are coming down, which is cool. We're cold and we'd asked for police and we paid for policing outside. They had 1 van. Then they bring another van. Like, they're saying, who's in charge? Rich is in charge, the manager. Where's all your doormen? He goes, oh yeah, someone coming at 11 o'clock. The queue was that big, the doorman couldn't get to the venue. Yeah? So everyone's now surrounding the door.
Oh, geez.
Ultimately, what happened, they lost control of the door. you know, the police are then trying to like get the dogs on them, people and dogs. It was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So you can understand what happens. Eventually they get in, but they weren't allowed to have everybody in. So half of the coaches said, look, we're not letting nobody in. You might as well then go back to Cardiff. You might as well go back down to London. Every coach that went past, it was a grand. I was stood at one time, one coach, that's £1,000 refund. £3,000. Yeah. 3 coaches, 4,000, 5,000. And I'm just looking at this. What's going on here? So all there, and never mind they were upset. So then we had certain mans who would follow us wherever, everything we were doing. These guys are saying, we came to Leeds. We know where some of you guys live. Oh my gosh. It's like, look, we tried to get as many people in as possible. I think we're out of the 3,500, they let us get maybe 1,600 in. Yeah, they're like, we haven't got enough staff yet. We haven't got this, we haven't got that. Health and safety. And the police went to lock it off. So we had to have certain negotiations with the police at this time and all the queues over there. The manager, he's a waste of time. He was like, look, mate, Rich, you just sit there. Let's deal with this. So we have to deal with it. Staff, we go, all right, cool, but you're just a promoter. He needs to say, so, yeah, but look at what's he saying? So we have to get on with the dorm and say, look, how can we deal with it? Yeah, we're not going to be able to cope with what's outside there. Police, can you stay out there? Yeah, cool, but put the dogs back in the van. Yeah, you lot, you stand here, lock off that room. We'll do this, we'll do that. We'll put some of the DJs back to back, boom, boom, boom. So that was that. So that was like, even now the tape packs, I've got it all like the Urban Music Showcase, tape pack, you know, big seller that one was. But that was that one incident. And then for 2 or 3 days, we were trying to say, couldn't go home.
Yeah.
Yeah, we used to live in Fallowfield at the time. They used to see us all the time, taking out flyers and posters and posters. So it was a talk, you know what I mean? And on that next night when we came home, all we were trying to say, we put a statement out. They didn't have Facebook and Instagram at that time. So it wasn't a case of, you know, we could put a post out there saying, everyone just go back to where you purchased your tickets, you know, and you get a full refund, you know, because we hadn't had those tickets and we couldn't get the money. So eventually everyone got the money back. But man's like, no, pay £40 a ticket. I want my money back today. I bought 5 tickets. What do you mean you mans aren't giving refunds? We'll fine you. No, this sort of nonsense. It was like, wow. So, but when you did get hold of the ticket agent from Bradford, Jason used to run the ones in Bradford and the ones were at the disc, and then the ones in Huddersfield, Rico Records, and the ones in Leeds, Jumbo Records. So, you know, Eastern Bloc, you know, John. These are our people who are like, look, when they come in, just give them the money. The ones who did, I've got a full ticket, just refund that and we'll wait a week. Yeah, we're not even bothered about the money just yet. We'll wait a month. But anybody's got a full ticket, that means they didn't get in, just refund them. Yeah, and then it died down. But that was, you know, even till today, that incident was the case.
Still looking over your shoulder today.
Yeah, certain parts of the time.
Money, Eddie. Oh, well, from Manchester's underground to the streets of care, you've shown us that purpose can evolve, but passion never dies. Thank you for coming to the show, Eddie. I know there's a lot more stories that you've hidden and not shared with us, but, you know, hopefully you'll be back for a part 2 one day. But yeah, and to everyone else, thank you for tuning in to Are We There Yet? Look out for the next episode.
Thank you.